We got Ian hanging out with us today.
Hi,
as well.
everyone. Thanks. Hello. Good to see you guys.
Yeah.
Ian is barefoot.
I am. Almost every day. Very nice. Yeah.
I respect that. I stream barefoot as well.
Do you ever ground in the grass? Just let your feet...
That's like more of my wife's thing. She's more crunchy than I am.
Yes, crunchy.
Yeah, I just bought a Berkey, so like that's pretty crunchy.
What's a Berkey?
You guys don't know about the Berkeys?
No, what's it?
So Berkey is kind of like
silver water filter.
The silver water filter, exactly.
Oh, okay.
So they've got silver in it. They've got some other pieces. They're these like really high end. They're like the Vitamix of water filters. And every hippy dippy person I know, everybody that's got a little bit of woo woo in them, has a Berkey. My wife has wanted one for a long. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, right.
My wife has been wanting one for a really long time. I just found out that the EPA outlawed them and claimed that they're a pesticide.
Yeah.
They've been in business for 25 years.
This is going to get legislated. There's going to be a lot of legal battles about that because that's insane.
Yeah. It's 25 years in business in the United States. They filter up to 6,000 gallons like per filter set, which is awesome. They filter out everything, but because they said they can get out bacteria, which they can, they are now falling under the EPA's things in the same way that carbon dioxide fell underneath their purview because it's a waste gas. So
let's talk about the DOJ. Let's talk about the FBI, right? So
they're all weaponized, it turns out.
Yeah, and I think Matt Gaetz and a handful of Republicans are doing a pretty good job as it pertains to calling this out. We had a really great video from Thomas Massey, who was questioning Merrick Garland, who it's absolutely ridiculous. They lie all the time. And they lied about spying on American citizens. So let me just, I'll just preface it with, like I said in the intro, Enrique Tarrio gets 22 years. Wasn't even there on January 6th.
Right.
Ray Epps tells people to do it. He's getting a single misdemeanor.
Claims via text message that he coordinated it.
He orchestrated it.
Right.
And so you have Enrique Tarrio, who the only thing they have is that he posted on, I think, Parler, "Don't effing leave." Whereas you have Ray Epps telling people to do it, but they claim Enrique's the one who actually orchestrated and conspired against the U.S. government. It sounds like it is abject corruption.
Absolutely. I mean, I think Ray Epps' text message said, "I started the whole thing."
He said he texted his nephew, "I orchestrated it."
So he's saying he did it.
It's like a confession.
And Enrique Tarrio's saying, "No, I'm in a hotel room in Baltimore," and he's getting 22 years. I don't know how anybody can look at this objectively and say it's not a weaponized justice system. So before I was an FBI agent, I was a cop. Before that, I was in the Army, in the infantry for 6 years. So, 9/11 kind of is what put me on this path. And I always thought, regardless of our shortfalls as a country, I love America and I want to do what I can to help her and to leave it better for my children than it was when I was growing up. Today, I can't say that it is. It's far worse in a lot of ways. And one thing that stands out to me, my old police chief, he used to always say, you don't have to be right, you just have to be reasonable. When you look at something like a 22-year sentence to Enrique Tarrio versus a misdemeanor charge, slap on the wrist to the guy who's claiming that he orchestrated it, there's nothing reasonable about any of that.
Yeah. So I guess we'll start with a broad question for you guys. There are a lot of people who have argued to me, a handful of people, usually liberals on the left, that it's bad apples. Even some conservatives have said, we're just talking about the DC field office. Like, there's a lot of really great FBI agents. They go after child trafficking. To what degree is the FBI corrupt, right? Is it really just like there's a network of higher-ups who are highly political and a lot of the agents are trying to do good work? Or is it just everybody's just in it for themselves and don't care? There's corruption and they just go along with it.
I'm going to tee up Garrett with an answer to this because there's a piece to it. There's a broader piece as well. So let's talk specifically on what you just said. I want people to imagine who's knocking on their door and asking them questions. Were you in Washington, D.C.? Who are the people that are doing the arrests of people that attended January 6th that were basically on an unguided tour of the Capitol? Now, there are people that were violent, and nobody in the FBI and nobody who was in the FBI should be mad about somebody who punched a cop going to jail. I have no problem with that. Like, send them to jail. You bring a flagpole and you use that as a weapon system, you're a jerk. You shouldn't be hitting cops. There are commensurate punishments, by the way, because I was actually at Trump's inauguration in 2017, and I saw what goes on when people committed felonies there. I watched Antifa riot. I saw them. They burned government vehicles then, too. They burned
I was there on the street watching them smash everything.
Yeah, I was undercover doing that.
Wow.
So I was moving around watching that thing happen. I actually arrested a guy for a felony, which was this has come back into my head recently because it's so relevant. He was shining a very large laser pointer. It looked like a freaking lightsaber. And he was shining at the Park Police helicopter, which is a felony.
You kill people.
It's
You cause a crash.
Yeah, and he did it probably 50 times during the day. It was in the radio all day long. It was in my earpiece. It's like, hey, we got another laser strike on Eagle 1. Eagle 1's getting hit with lasers. Green laser, Eagle 1. And then after they had burned down that thing on North on K Street, and there was like a
vehicle.
There was a vehicle
torched
fire.
A limo. It was massive.
Yeah, so that was actually belonging to the Secret Service. That was a Secret Service limo.
Really?
Oh,
it was reported that it was a migrant's private limo service.
It may have been a migrant's private limo service, but that may have been who the driver was, but apparently it was a government vehicle. That's what I was told. Wow. So we're up there, and they had this, like, it was very dystopian, by the way. Like, all these things were burned, and there was like a rock band that was playing that was kind of mediocre. And then there were like all these kids screaming into the cops' faces back and forth. And I see this guy shine a laser pointer through the trees, and so you could see all the laser hits going through the trees right into the helicopter. So we followed this guy. We got permission over the radio to actually put him into cuffs. We put him into cuffs. Park police came, transported him, and took him away. The charges were dropped like the day later.
Wow.
And I wrote up the whole thing. So that's one thing that happened. And then on January 6th, we saw people that got hunted down 2 years after the fact by the FBI. Who's going through the door? Is it the higher ups? Is it the people that are on the 7th floor of the Hoover building that are doing these arrests? And the answer, of course, is no. So then you have to look, what is the capacity of your average FBI agent and your average FBI intelligence analyst who's doing these cases to engage in tyrannical, one-sided enforcement? And there's a historical model, which is kind of Garrett's thing. He's brought it to my attention, and I just live in there. But I'll let you talk about, like, Reserve Police Battalion 101. It's a direct example.
I want to add real quick to this. The riots on May 29th in Washington, D.C., where they firebombed the White House and St. John's Church.
I was outside the church the next day.
Yeah, and President Trump's forced into a bunker.
Yep.
I was sitting down at the poker tables, as I often do on the weekends. And some guy recognized me. We were playing. It was a really fun day. And he asked me about, where I think this is all going. There was another guy at the table who was a liberal who said, I don't like Trump. He's like, man, I do not like Trump. I won't vote for him, but they should not be doing this legal stuff because it's getting really crazy. The conversation turns to, I said, no one even knows that on May 29th, far left extremists were firebombing the White House and St. John's Church.
They were putting Secret Service guys in the hospital. Those guys were catching bricks to the head. 70
plus injuries, 100 plus injuries, and nobody even knows about it. And the anti-Trump guy had this, like, he immediately darted over and looked at me with his, like, what? Like, he didn't know about it.
There were people that were hiding in the statues. They have some of these things that are like big chalices that are in Lafayette Park. And I actually found out as I was leaving DC, because I lived in DC for 5 years. I worked at the Washington field office. That was my my backyard. Some kid who was doing an inspection on my roof as we sold our house. He was like, "Oh man, I was at the White House like on that day, and I was hiding up in this thing, and I thought Secret Service was going to get me." And I was like, "You're telling this to an FBI agent?"
Yeah, but he knows he's good.
And there's nothing I could do about it.
Yeah,
because we are not encouraged to be able to take proactive means. Like that guy admitting that basically he was involved in that riot. It didn't go anywhere. How many charges do we see?
So let's throw it to Garrett to elaborate on that question. It seems like, I saw a video of a guy, 3 FBI agents show up to his house asking him for information on one of his neighbors, and he's like, not happening.
Right.
And so it does seem that it is the I guess, what would you call it? Rank and file, regular old FBI.
Yeah, rank and file, yeah. So Kyle mentioned Police Battalion 101, and there's a book called Ordinary Men by a guy named Christopher Browning. And it has stood out to me for a number of years now, but it really, I guess, came to the forefront of my mind when I was in new agents training in Quantico. So every new FBI employee is taken on a field trip to the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., and it's an extremely powerful experience. And the entire point of that trip, the director of the FBI speaks to your class at the end. The whole point of the trip is don't forget the past so we don't repeat it.
It's put on by the ADL for whatever that's worth.
What?
Just letting you know.
Yeah. And
it's actually a good trip. But
I thought it was a great trip. But I don't know if you guys have ever been there, but on the wall, when you walk in, one of the walls, it's a poem from a Lutheran pastor, Martin Niemöller, and it's the one that essentially says, that first they came for, the communists and nobody spoke up, and at the end, then they came for me and nobody was left to speak up. And it's real big on the wall. I remember seeing that, and I remember just thinking in the context of law enforcement, it's a preeminent example, because this Ordinary Men story, they were butchers and carpenters, and they were reserve cops, right? And so they have their ordinary duties, and then they get activated because the war is starting to kick off. And this particular group gets sent to Poland. And in July of 1942, they get orders to start executing all the Jews in the town. And what do?
They just do it.
They just do it.
They got to the point where people who were moving too slowly to get onto the boxcars were getting shot in the back of the head, old people and toddlers, because they weren't, and these are ordinary men. That's the story. And so the story of tyranny, and this is the thing that I think Garret and I were so scared about. Garret and I didn't know each other in the FBI. We never worked together. Okay. There's another guy named Steve Friend who's part of our little kind of collective. We call ourselves the Suspendables. It started off as a joke. The Suspendables started off as a joke because we saw the Sly Stallone movie The Expendables.
Right.
And we're like, well, we've all been suspended. We can't come back to our job. So we're the Suspendables. And that was an inside joke to ourselves. We wrote a letter to the FBI director, an open letter with 45 questions. Why not? Because Trump was number 45. We thought that was a funny number. It was literally just kind of an FU number.
Yeah.
So we write up 45 questions for the FBI director. We put it on Twitter. It ends up going viral. And then the New York Times wrote a hit piece, really, talking about the Suspendables. And when the paper of record starts talking about your organization like it's a real thing, you're like, I guess we're a real thing. Now we have it. So we got merch. we grabbed the website and went after it. But when you are in that category of people, we didn't know each other. We never worked together. We all just saw the exact same problem. And every single person that's ever come forward that I've talked to that has been in the FBI in the last little bit, they cite the Holocaust trip, the going to that memorial museum. You can walk through there. You smell the shoes of the people that were killed. They have a room that has something like 800,000 shoes. It's just like, it's overwhelming. It's a large room. You walk through the central little corridor. There's glass walls on either side of it. And it's just piles and piles and piles of shoes that they took out of one of the camps. Those are people's lives that were destroyed because government officials didn't say no. They said, okay, my job, my paycheck, my pension, I've got a family, I got a mortgage, I've got health insurance I need to pay. All the things that we're seeing that the current FBI agents are doing, they're showing up on arrest warrants for guys who are like pro-life protesters, like Mark Hout, who was in Philadelphia. And basically some guy said the worst things you can imagine to his 8-year-old son at the time. And Mark Hout was a football player in college. He's a big dude. And he threw the guy on the ground. Like, imagine if you're a father, and I've got 4 children, and Garrett's got 4 children. Somebody comes up to my 6-year-old and starts putting some like horrific, swear words and some really graphic language that's really awful, saying things about their dad. They're probably going to experience some physical violence from me. And it may not be that well restrained. I thought Mark was incredibly restrained. And the DOJ came even after the local authorities said, this is just a spat between 2 guys. One guy had instigating language. The other guy got physically, and he was very restrained. That's the end of it. The FBI came and investigated that, and they came after him under the FACE Act, which is crazy. It's fully crazy. And now we're sentencing people in D.C. That's currently happening right now. We just sentenced a bunch of pro-life protesters that were praying the rosary.
I think it was like a 70-year-old woman.
Yeah, one was 71, one was 78, and there was a guy who was 41.
They gave her a decade, I think.
Well, it's still. I don't know if they've been sentenced yet. I know that they've been convicted.
They're facing.
They're facing major.
I think a couple of them did get sentenced.
I'd have to pull it up.
But
it's atrocious.
Yeah, it's
evil.
It's
and
evil.
And it's 2-tiered. That's the real crazy thing.
And
if
then
that was because here's the other thing. The FACE Act actually has the 4th clause of it says that it protects the free access to churches. So if you're obstructing access to a church, then you're not allowed. Then you have the same violation. That's the same crime. But look at the number of people from Jane's Revenge that were like firebombing pregnancy crisis centers, or going after Catholic churches and defacing the tabernacles or stealing, any of the relics. That should also have the same thing. If we saw equal justice, people would go, I guess don't screw with churches and don't screw with abortion clinics. That would work out okay.
It's 3-tiered. You have far leftists who firebomb buildings, no charges. The guy you arrest, laser. So people need to understand about these lasers. When you point at a helicopter, they can cause temporary blindness. That means the helicopter crashes.
It refracts inside the windshield of the helicopter. And so they can't see where they're going. We're talking about a helicopter that is the only helicopter that's allowed to fly over the crowd on the presidential inauguration.
And that's a big deal. They want the crash.
Yeah.
They want the news. They blame the government. So
he went to American University, by the way, and was part of one of the Antifa cells there, I'm pretty sure, because that's where all the organizing for Disrupt J20. I know you guys talked about it. We were talking about it as well, but there was a big push to try to stop the inauguration of Donald Trump, which we've already forgotten about that insurrection.
So you have this tier where they actively commit crimes, then for some reason just get let go. You then have the middle ground tier where if you are a regular American facing crimes that only the feds can handle, you are ignored completely. They're not going to bother you. They're not going to waste their time on you. They're not going to help you either.
These are like white collar. Like imagine if you have a business. Let's say you guys got defrauded out of $500,000. They might pick it up.
Nope.
But if you got defrauded out of $200,000, I know they wouldn't in this area.
I had a circumstance where I was told that $1 million won't move the needle for the FBI.
It depends on the area. There are places where $1 million will. So in New Mexico, it might. But in this area, $5 million. Where you?
So to keep it vague, I'll keep it as vague as I can. I had an issue which was, I believe, an issue over $1 million across multiple states. And we were told explicitly it won't move the needle for the FBI. Have a nice day. And I'm like,
In the districts you guys are in, that's correct.
that's crazy. But obviously we're on the ass end tier where they're basically like, we don't want to help you. We want to find a way to lock you up.
Right.
But then you have the third tier, which is, they want to lock you up. So they'll come knock on your door and they'll say, we're not here investigating you. Could you tell me what time it is? And you'll be like, I don't know, it's 1 or something. Aha, you lied to the FBI. It's noon. You're under arrest. Like Michael Flynn.
That's a felony. So Garret worked on the Joint Terrorism Task Force. He got to see this stuff in Kansas, which is a pretty red area.
Yeah.
And so you can see who they go after with that.
Yeah.
Well, the Michael Flynn thing, right? It was like an informal interview.
Yeah, it was a perjury trap.
He was hanging out. My understanding is that it was not a formal interview where he thought he was being investigated or anything like that.
Garret can comment on this as well. I was trained at the FBI Academy. We never use 18 USC 1001 as a standalone charge. It's not a standalone charge. Yep. It's something you use to add. So we pile it on. It's like, not only did you do this fraud and not only did you do this other terrible thing, but also you lied about it. And now we have an additional felony. And so we have more leverage on you. It's like getting charged with 5 felonies is better than 1.
Yeah.
If you're going to go and try to push them to a plea.
I've gone into interviews when I was an FBI agent, and I used that threat of 1001 with the person I'm talking to, because by the time you get to that point, if you're doing your job correctly, you probably already have them on a 1001, or you're confident you will, because you have done so much due diligence to get to the point where it's like, okay, now I'm going to go interview the subject of this potential crime. And I would lead with that. Like, hey, if you lie to me, that is an additional charge. And they'd always say, yeah, I know.
What was the routine for you guys? I mean, obviously, when you're in the FBI, it's not like you're hunting down, seditionists or anything, or insurrectionists. There's like, what's like the most common thing you would deal with?
Everybody gets assigned to different types of cases. So he was working terrorism. I was working Chinese threat my first 2 years.
Wow.
Which is the worst thing in the world. It's the most boring thing you can do. I did FISA. I basically looked at, you've heard of FISA 702. There's a lot of coverage about this. We can talk about it maybe long form a little bit. But I read FISA 702 for a living. It's the most horrible thing for an outdoor kind of guy like me to be sitting behind a desk for 10 hours a day and reading Chinese emails. Like, I don't speak Chinese, by the way. I don't read Chinese. We finally got this gal to our squad. This is the brilliance. Everyone thinks that the FBI is like like this mastermind diabolical thing. It's more like Forrest Gump. Like, sometimes they get it right, and a lot of times it's just retarded. And so we end up with this situation where I get a Chinese linguist analyst, and she's assigned to the desk right next to me. It's perfect. She's on my squad now. I'm like, oh, good. We've got Chinese FISA, got Chinese linguist. It's good stuff. So I'm like, yeah, I got these emails. Can you tell me what this says real quickly? Just eyeball it, whether it's worth my time. I'll send it off to the linguist for professional translation, whatever. And she was like, oh, I can't read Chinese characters. I just speak it. And I'm like, wow. I'm like, everything I get is written. Every single thing I get is in written digital copy. So that's the brilliance of the FBI for you.
But not only that, I'm sure a lot of the emails were like, hey, did you pick up the milk, bread, and eggs?
It's spam. I read spam. Like think about what the volume of your email is. Imagine if there was no filter and you got all of it. Yeah, it's all spam.
It's emails so it's
would you like to take a cruise? Have you thought about the Pengu Islands? It's like, oh, it's garbage.
Yeah, I get a lot of Donald Trump emails.
So there's that. I mean, that's what I did doing Chinese CI. And then I spent 3 years doing surveillance where I looked at a little bit of everything, but I wasn't the guy who was the case agent. I was looking at stuff. And we have some bad guys out there. There's some legit terrorist subjects who do some weird things. None of the legit terrorist subjects that I've seen have ever been arrested. The ones that were the scariest, that were armed, swore allegiance to ISIS, going out and doing like firearms training in the middle of the desert and like getting themselves ready to conduct an attack, and had already said that they wanted to like put their life on the line for Allah. Those people have not been arrested.
Is that because they want to let them commit the crime, catch them, and then have them lead them to the next big...
They're totally incentivized to have an overt act, and getting someone to do an overt act. But, the other thing is like, I used to work a lot of white supremacists, and you'll find what they'll do is a white supremacist on average, in my experience, and I have 3 years and thousands of hours of watching people in that category. It's like, it's a 20-something-year-old kid who may or may not be in college, who wears loafers and khaki pants and a polo shirt and is drinking a latte at Starbucks, and he's like rage texting or tweeting, and he's saying shitty things on Reddit, and he's a racist maybe. And then when you put an undercover into them, which costs tens of thousands of dollars, if not more, plus my surveillance team, which would cost, just on salaries alone, $10,000 a day for a shift for 8 hours. They go like, hey man, you want to do some real racist stuff and like go kill some cops or something? You want to kill some black cops? And he's like, no, I think I'm going to like get a job and like maybe meet a girl and hold hands with her. Like, they don't want to do the thing they say online. It turns out they're keyboard warriors.
Yeah. There's a funny meme about that where a guy posted on 4chan that he was posting spicy memes and pictures because he's just antagonizing.
Or shit posting.
And
or
then
whatever.
he's like, feds showed up at my house, and when they realized I'm just like some fat dude who sits in the living room and plays video games all day, they apologized and left.
now they'll arrest you. Like Douglas Mackey's
yeah.
in jail for that.
What did he do?
Oh, right.
He made Trump memes that said, if you want to, I think the allegation is that he deprived people of their ability to vote.
Because it was like
Yes.
text
Because
to
you
vote
could
or something.
text your vote. I mean, you might as
Right.
well just say, look, if you love Hillary Clinton, go yell at the moon and we'll record it.
Yeah.
It's the same stupidity.
Yep.
And nobody has a, like, I don't
It's
know.
like the first time someone's been charged for something like this.
It's a clear
They claimed
First
he was
Amendment
it was disenfranchisement or something like that.
Yeah, conspiracy to, it's a conspiracy against rights is what the charge. I think it's 18 U.S.C. 242.
So
but
everybody knows the stories, especially when you look at like the Whitmer case. 3 more acquittals. That what the FBI does is, like you mentioned, they'll find some guy who's like sitting on his couch being like, "No dang old government, I hate the government," and then they'll come and be like, "Here are a bunch of weapons. Here's a plan for you."
he worked on the
Would
task
you like
force
to
that
do
would
it?
do that stuff. So Garrett can tell you how
Yeah,
these
tell
terrorists
us
go.
about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's countless examples of this, but it happens all the time. I just pulled up one. Do you guys remember back in 2015, the Garland, Texas shooting? I mean, like, I feel like a lot of this stuff we have
Draw
to,
Muhammad.
we have to
Yeah.
bring it back up so we don't memory hole it. The headline from The Intercept, and this is from 2016. This just came up recently again because I think the case is ongoing. But the headline says, FBI agent goaded Garland shooter to tear up Texas, raising new alarms about Bureau's methods. This undercover FBI agent followed that shooter and never intervened because the FBI is incentivized for cases like this. So then they can come out and say, hey, we stopped the terror. We stopped the terrorism. You guys ever see the meme with the stick?
Yeah.
They're
and
poking
it's
the
like,
Pepe.
Do
Do
terror.
something, yeah.
And it's like, that's what this is. And people say, oh, that's just an anecdote. Okay, yeah, the one I pulled up, you could call an anecdote if you want. Does that make it okay? Does that make it right? And this isn't an anecdote because there are countless examples of this type of thing.
We got questions about Las Vegas.
So do we.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think everybody inside the Bureau has questions about Las Vegas, but nobody knows the answers to them is the other crazy thing.
Yep.
Because it's compartmented. And that's the other piece people have to understand. They go, why didn't you blow the whistle on aliens? Or why didn't you blow the whistle on this? It's like, dude, you can only see what you can see.
You got to be like, dude.
You have to have a need to know, even on cases that are not classified.
You just got to be like, there's nothing to blow the whistle on. The aliens are good dudes. I mean, crap.
They're just turning into cakes in Mexico.
Yeah, I saw that. That was really good. The aliens that they published.
Yeah.
There's a video of someone cutting them open. It's cake. It was cake the whole time.
Garrett, were you saying with this Texas shooting and maybe with all of these that the FBI agents will set it up and orchestrate a terror plot just to break up the plot to be like, I was the guy that stopped terror?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
And that because it looks good, it's like a badge of honor.
So in the FBI, there's a system called IPM, Integrated Program Management, and it's basically like a business model for law enforcement. Which in the supposed land of the free, that's not how law enforcement is supposed to be working. I'm pretty sure people who came up with this idea never took a constitutional law class. If they did, they need to go back and take it again because that is not how law enforcement is supposed to work in this country. Where maybe you find somebody on Facebook who posts something that is derogatory, or you think in your head, maybe we could go with this guy a little bit more. He seems predisposed is what the FBI and the DOJ will use because they will set up a terror plot like this. And in this case, that guy did go and shoot. And I think a local police officer or security guard is the one who intervened.
He was an off-duty cop working as a security guard, shot him with a revolver, killed 2 men with AKs stepping out of the car.
Wow.
Yeah.
Took rounds to the ankle, I think, and the knee as well. So he was shot in the return. But the FBI was sitting there watching it happen because they needed that overt act of terrorism to be able to get the terrorism stat.
Right.
Wow.
I want to tell you the story that I think is the way that it worked. Okay, this is the overarching narrative for people to grasp, and it's the more people can understand this, the better off we are. The FBI was incentivized right after 9/11. My buddy George Hill, who was an FBI whistleblower, he's the one who brought forward the Bank of America records and testified in front of Congress. Bank of America volunteered all their stuff to the FBI. They said anybody who used a Bank of America charge card that was in DC on January 5th, 6th, and 7th. Here's a list of all the people that did that. So you can run down anybody in DC voluntarily. And by the way, here's the prioritized versions who have bought a gun at some point in time using one of our products. They gave him a cross-reference. So that's what George Hill brought forward. And he told me this on my little podcast that we were sitting in an interview, and I'm like, what's the story here? He goes, on September 12th, 2001, the American people accepted a new definition of national security. And the definition is this. It went from protect and defend the Constitution, secure the republic that exists under the Constitution. That's what it previously meant. People die in that pursuit all the time. They have for a long time. I have friends who have. I know Garret does as well. When that happens, that's what we did. On the 12th of September, 2001, the definition became no American dies from terrorism on American soil again. And once you do that, that is a totalitarian position. That is zero COVID. It doesn't matter what zero anything, a no-fail mission equals, you're going to be tyrannical about it. In the military, that's fine. If you have a no-fail mission and things have to get really aggressive and you're going to sacrifice people along the way, if that is that important, they do so. But that's what the mission changed to. And so what we did was the intelligence community and the FBI specifically got involved in hunting down international terrorism, what we call IT. Okay, there's a whole section for it, the International Terrorism Operations Section, ITOS. And those guys hunt down international terrorists. Okay, well, you run out of those because our military is fantastic at what they do. Hurt feelings, break stuff overseas, tie up ISIS, tie up Al-Qaeda, you name it. They were doing that. They were doing that overseas. And so they did. Well, we ran out of like local international terrorists. Like you just didn't go down and find anymore. But there's a big budget. And so they had to keep finding them. So they found a second tier of people. And what we found in the mid 2000s into like 2010, 12, 15, around before 2015, the tier was called HVEs. You've probably heard the term homegrown violent extremists. Yeah. Most people don't know what that means. And that means people who are domestic. They're first generation Americans, they're second generation, maybe they're naturalized US citizens, but they live here and they're in the United States. They have a right to be here. But they associate with a foreign ideology. So now you've gone from foreign ideology that's foreign to domestic with foreign ideology. Once you're looking inside of your own house and you're like, who are the terrorists? Then you might as well keep the third tier, which is called domestic violent extremists, which is what we're at right now. That's tier 3, because you're already looking around the house. You go, who else is a threat? How about that guy? He's got a rifle on his shirt and he's got an American flag that looks like an upside down Betsy Ross flag. That's a problem. So now you end up with things that I exposed with my buddies. It was like the Betsy Ross flag, the Gadsden flag, the 1835 Gonzales battle flag, the freaking like a Punisher skull. These are symbols of militia violent extremists because there's all these different tiers under DVEs.
I have to say that if Gadsden, Gonzalez, Betsy Ross, those are, that's American iconography.
Yep.
Anyone who says that's our enemy is an occupying force of this country.
They are.
And what did we do, Tim, when we swore our oath to the Constitution of this country? We swore to defend enemies both foreign and domestic.
And the issue now is that there are a lot of anti-American elements in the government, in the DOJ, that don't like this country's history and view the fact that they view the Betsy Ross flag as a symbol of extremism.
Right.
You might as well have British redcoats, I mean figuratively, in the government telling you, hey, we're here to weed out the terrorists. No. The Patriots back in the Revolution flew the American flag, and they said that's a terror symbol. You're rebels. Right. It's a rebel flag.
If you think the T goes in the harbor, if that's your mindset, that's where the T goes, then you're a problem apparently to this government. And that's not acceptable because the government doesn't actually work for us at this point. I mean, that's pretty obvious.
I gotta say, it is really crazy when you think about the path from legit.
Look at the biggest simps for government. They're in the birthplace of the American Revolution.
Seriously, but
like just go any blue state, like go to Connecticut. Go to Massachusetts. It's crazy.
And they didn't they move the Springfield Armory out of Massachusetts? It's insane.
They've all left. They went to Colorado. Some left Colorado. They've gone to Texas. It
is really crazy that there is a direct line from a bunch of dudes threw tea into the water to the shots fired at Lexington and Concord. It was a direct line.
Of course.
Because they threw the tea in the water, the Crown responded with the coercive acts. Then the colonists responded with the Suffolk Resolves. So then the Redcoats came and said, give us your guns. They said, no, war.
Yep. That's it.
And they could have just, the Crown could have said, we're going to drop the tea thing, and there'd be no revolution.
Yeah. But that's the same thing as saying the FBI would drop the J6 thing.
Exactly. They can't
do it. They're pot committed to this thing. I mean, I know you play poker, but it's like they are. They've put so much in there. They have everything on the line. And here's what's really wild too, because I found this out from a guy who was a whistleblower to me, or we shared this with Congress. This is how insane it got. They are so desperate to find domestic violent extremists, which is the new push. Like I said, there's ITOS and there's a thing called DTOS. That's the domestic terrorism side of it. DTOS was on the hook they have gone so far and above in 2022, and they've booked so many hours. FBI agents actually bill their hours against a type of case, not case specific, but a style of case, specifically like domestic terrorism, which are 266 designations. The international ones are 415s. So the 266s were so heavy in hours when it came down to the number of people working it, that they were looking at losing the money from Congress for ITOS because they hadn't billed enough for 15 hours.
Wow.
And it was $300+ million they were not going to get if they couldn't figure out how to take some of these domestic terrorists and also cross-link them to things. So they were going through chats online to say, Ian, he's a domestic violent extremist. He's got a real problem. Has he ever talked to a guy in the same chat room that an ISIS guy was in, like at some point in time? Can we link him to ISIS anyway? Can we find out if he has some friends that were in Al-Shabaab, even if it's like, multiple jumps?
Yeah.
Because they needed to cross-link it so they could cross-bill these things.
However,
and get the money.
There were several instances. How about Stop Cop City, where we know there were, I think a Canadian and a French guy were active there.
Yep.
And you also have several instances where Antifa were in direct communication with their European counterparts in Eastern Europe, committing acts of violence against government targets. I mean, these people have not
even
been
ranked.
Yeah. Right.
Christopher Wray himself has said that Antifa, that's just an ideology. And it's like, no, there are
that
legitimate...
ideology almost got me shot when I was in.
But
I was in Portland. I did low vis work in Portland in 2020.
That's like saying ISIS is just an ideology, and it's like,
it is.
yes, the like.
But there are people behind it.
What is the? I don't want to get this wrong, and I don't want to insult anybody. What's the exact phrase for the type of Islam that ISIS was practicing? There's a phrase for it, isn't there, that describes the kind of extremist view they had? I don't want to. I think I know what it is, but I don't want to offend someone if I say the wrong one. So I'm not going to.
That's fair.
Because there's Islam where it's absolutely
need a jihad
totally
on
fine.
You today. You probably already.
Oh no, I don't care about that. I'm saying like. I know people who are Muslim who are good people.
Yeah,
I don't want to.
Sure.
I don't want to insult anybody who's a legitimate, practicing good person who wants peace.
Right.
These people were burning and raping people and murdering them
and beheading journalists and all kinds of stuff.
You have Antifa, that is the descriptor of the cells. So without going into the brand names, there's a bunch of brand name Antifa cells, and they're all interlinked. It's just an idea. It's like, well, yeah, that's like saying like jihadi extremism or whatever is just an idea. Sure, but we're targeting ISIS.
Yeah. They know better. I got TDY'd to Portland, temporary duty assignment. So we were out there for a couple weeks. I got to spend time, what they would call either undercover, they would call it covert surveillance. That's actually the wrong word. It's low visibility.
Yeah.
So it's nominally backstopped, which means if you were to go hey, I didn't run around with a fake ID on me. I could. There are ways to do that, but I just didn't do that. They have a thing called AFID. Many people don't know. It's the Alternative Federal ID Program. So I could get my real picture and a real Virginia driver's license with a fake name on it.
Nice.
And credit card and so on. So you can do that kind of thing. The federal government actually has that program. But I wasn't using that. I was just sitting there. I was Kyle Seraphin, but I just didn't tell you who I was. And I'm driving in a Tacoma truck that I rented from Enterprise. And I'm hanging out and I'm just watching guys from Antifa, women from Antifa too, a lot of them. There's a lot of women running things.
Yeah.
And we had live feed from all the streamers coming into the command post.
Yep.
We had real-time intelligence from all the different groups. DHS was there. The local PD was there. Portland Police Bureau had representatives, FBI, so on and so forth. Different DHS, Border Patrol, if they had their people, because they had, defensive force around the courthouse. And we're watching the coordination in real time. They had FRS radios. You know what those are? Mm-hmm.
No.
They're just if you were to go to Walmart and buy yourself some Cobra radios or some Midland radios or something. So FRS, it's not encrypted, it's in the open. And they were talking and coordinating, sending security elements to check in on supposed feds, some of whom were actual feds, including my buddies.
Wow.
And they were running off federal surveillance agents who were simply monitoring what was going on in case things got violent. And the subjects that we had investigations into. I saw 0 prosecutions of them. We had recorded that they actually called out my license plate. They sent a security element to my vehicle, sent 6 people and surrounded my vehicle to intimidate me, which is, by the way, not that intimidating. I had a big beard. I'm sitting there in a hoodie with body armor on. I've got a rifle by my knee and my handgun right here. And I've got 6 people walking around. They ended up outing themselves because they're also not very bright. But they were sitting there and they're like, you look like a Fed. What are you doing? I'm like, I'm eating beef jerky. What are you doing? It's cold out there. Why are you wearing fishnets? I'm just kind of hassling them because some chick comes up. They're all wearing a thing that says juice with the Black Power fist on it. JUICE.
It's actually the red salute. It's the communist fist.
Okay, so it's a communist fist, not the Black Power fist. So they're wearing this on a...
But just to clarify, it is used as a symbol of Black Power, but what people need to understand is the fist you see Antifa use, BLM use, it's originally called the red salute. It's the communist salute, which is the exact same thing as the Roman salute in the inverse.
Perfect.
So the Nazis, the fascists, would do the Roman salute, that's the Hitler salute. Mm-hmm. The purpose of the red salute, holding your fist up facing outward, is to show that the fingers together, while individually are weak, together make a fist. That's the purpose, is a communist symbol of power. And now what's happened is you have people I've seen college students hold up the red salute marching down the street, not realizing what it means and what it comes from, and they don't care.
Well, the historical ignorance is shocking right now about a lot
So when
of
you
things.
see, so here's what happens: you see the Tiki Torch march in Charlottesville, and we're like, "This is awful. These are bad," and they're screaming and yelling. A lot of dumb young people who like there was, my understanding is that for most of these guys who went there, they weren't told exactly what was going to happen, but they don't
Tiki
care.
Torch one?
Yeah, there's organizers, a large group of them. They know exactly what their plan is, but they need to get as much filler as possible. Now the media will call them out, rightly so. Call out the extremists. But when the left comes out marching, holding up the communist fist, the media's nothing.
Silent, yeah.
But anyway, sorry, continue.
So, I was watching hands, I'm watching demeanor, I've got hands down by waistlines. Like I probably could have articulated justifiably shooting at least one of the guys when things were going weird, because it got real weird. I mean, it's weird when 6 people surround your vehicle in the dark, right, and you're by yourself. And I was out there kind of as bait. Like I talked to a case agent and he goes, look, they called out your thing. You can bug out. Do you want to sit there and see what they're going to do? Like it might be weird. And I go, yeah, I'm willing to take the risk. I'm willing to sit here. And that is a risk. And I've got little kids and it's like, whatever. I want to see what they're going to do. Are they going to attack a federal agent?
Yeah.
And it didn't get to that. And I was very restrained. And luckily they didn't get anything stupid. One of the guys goes, I recognize you, bro. Were you at the park on Saturday? And like every day runs together when you do surveillance for like 16 days in a row. So I'm like, I don't know. Like what park? And he's like, this park. And I'm like, I don't know the parks that well in Portland. So I couldn't remember what it was. And I was like, maybe. I don't remember. He was like, I was on the blue and white Yamaha. I remember you. And I'm like, oh, no kidding. I never saw your face. Snap, like grab a picture. Thanks, bro. Like, cool. Like I remember you organizing and like running around. They're very coordinated.
Yeah. Yep.
We recorded their radio traffic coordinating. They ran federal agents off the job that they were doing, which, whatever. It was because we didn't want to break cover, but they were doing organized things. That's what organized crime looks like. They have better watch and lookout setups than MS-13. And I've worked on that threat as well in places like Casa de Maryland. So they had lookouts, they had organization, they had responses to keep themselves from being, viewed and infiltrated.
Well,
and they're violent.
There are tiers, right? So these guys who probably surround you are just useful idiot types. They're they march along with whatever they're told to do. Someone says, "Hey guys, let's go surround this vehicle." They're very clueless to a certain degree, but they have training. So as you move up the tiers, you actually have NGOs. You have funding for training these groups in how to do everything they do, and they have multiple legal apparatus. How do I say this? What's the plural? Apparatuses?
Yeah, well, NLG, the National Lawyers Guild, was out there. They were their spotters.
As well as the ACLU. Yep. So the National Lawyers Guild functions, and it's hilarious. You got a guy, I think it's the National or SPLC in Stop Cop City.
SPLC was in Cop City. Yep.
So this is a guy who's like, I'm just a legal observer there with a group of people sharing the ideology as they firebomb government property and things like this. And then they try and pretend I'm just a lawyer.
Right.
It's like, you maybe have an argument if you said you were a journalist, okay? Because
that didn't work in the Capitol.
No, of course.
Just saying USA gets you sent to jail.
Right.
You look at what
That's
happened
Stephen
to
Horn.
or look at what happened to Owen Schroyer just standing outside.
Not even in the building.
Yeah,
and
not
then,
even in it.
Meanwhile, the guy who claims to have orchestrated. But this is funny. I remember I'm in Boston, and you have left and right. You had people on the quote unquote conservative side, and they have no weapons. They have shields. On the Antifa side, weapons, crowbars, baseball bats. On the Antifa side, they had two organizations, including the legal observers, the National Lawyers Guild, and I think it might have been the ACLU, I'm not sure. It may have been a local chapter. And I asked the NLG, and I'm like, your mission is to observe the police for protesters. How come you're only over here? And they're like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, there's protesters over there too. Like, how come you guys aren't observing them? And they were like, I don't understand what you mean.
They had the Antifa radios in Portland.
Yes.
Here's the thing that I saw, and this is one of those things you'll never be able to unsee. I watched this lady. She was very notable because every single red-blooded male that was on my team, which was almost all my team, recognized this lady. She was walking around braless. She was large-breasted. And she was, bouncing around. And so like, you could see that in your mirror. Like when you work in a car for a living and all you do is watch people, like someone walking with no bra, that's like a double D that's cruising around like 100 yards behind your car. You'll be like, what? Like, what's going on back there? You'll just see it. It's just, you can't help it. This woman was picked up by every single person. She was writing down license plates. She had one of the radios. She was calling in the license plates. She had the NLG hat and it was a green NLG shirt. That's the other thing. She had a bright green shirt on, which are, like a forest green shirt.
They have the neon hat.
She was actively recorded calling in the license plates for the security teams to respond to.
Right.
So we know there was coordination that was happening for people who were at least wearing NLG garb.
And they're funded.
And we could see that, and the FBI has done zero about it.
You referred to the Antifa movement as organized crime, and I'm realizing this is 21st century This is what organized crime looks like in the 21st century with social media, with the ability to
It looks
rally.
exactly like what the gangs do.
But it's like high tech because they don't have to be centralized; it's decentralized.
Yeah. So the people that run MS-13 are down in El Salvador. The people that used to run La Cosa Nostra, they used to be back in the old country. They were in Sicily. This is standard. It's actually not that new. They just have different techniques. They're using things like social media, and they organize. They're bringing in people to cover for them, right? But the way that it works, it's pretty straightforward. Like organized crime now, what we call talk West and talk East. These are the two different hemispheres that we deal with organized crime. They have a mission. They have a motive. They have a profit margin that they're trying to accomplish. Antifa is more ideological based, I think. I think they're less interested in making money out of it, although I'm sure some of them do it for a living.
It's a cult.
But there are people that believe in the things that were being done in all organized crime. And if you look at people that are like part of the gang that happened in the MS-13s, the Latin Kings, La MA, you take your pick. They all have like buy-in. They have a culture. They have, foot soldiers. There's people that know more. There's people that have more or less training. And then they are more or less decentralized, whether it be at different prisons, different cities. There's what they call cliques. That's how we organize MS-13 guys. They call themselves a clique here or a clique there. The cliques have factions. They fight. I mean, it's so... That's what it looks like.
The assumption I would make, based on the arrests that have taken place, the prosecutions, as well as the lack of enforcement against certain obvious crimes and extremists, the assumption I would make is that Antifa-aligned individuals have reached high positions in the FBI and now are in a great deal of control.
Or the FBI sees it as an opportunity to allow for domestic unrest so that they can get more funding and militarize. What do you guys think?
Yes, but to stop there,
you still have to do enforcement actions.
To stop there, my point is, if they are enforcing against the right to a psychotic and extreme degree, along with other elements of, like federal prosecutors, it does not appear to be simply, we need domestic terror to justify funding. It is explicitly, we're going to ignore the terrorists over there and target our political enemies.
Do you think it's because it's like too much of a challenge to go after Antifa? Like sometimes organized crime, they just won't go after it because it's too entrenched.
We followed all of them. Yeah, we followed them around. We knew who they were.
So is it that the higher ups in the FBI are ideologically aligned with Antifa?
I think they're just ideologically aligned with the left in general.
Well, of course, the Antifa being a loose structure of various branded cells that uphold the leftist.
It's the militant part of it, right?
Exactly.
I think you'd be hard pressed to find
until they got the FBI on board.
An FBI executive who will come out and say, whatever Antifa is saying and stand behind that. I mean, I don't think. Well, there's
they do though. They say Antifa is an idea.
Yeah, they say it's an idea, but they won't.
That's top cover.
They won't necessarily back up the ideology themselves out loud. I mean, maybe you might be able to find.
But what is the ideology of Antifa?
To destroy America as we know it.
It's like
hates capitalism.
It's a political weapon, and so if you are a tyrant that wants control, you can take a look at what happens in New York City. Antifa shows up to a Gavin McInnes speaking event, Proud Boys, attacks random attendees. When the Proud Boys are leaving and surrounded, basically at every corner, the Proud Boys engage in a fight with Antifa, charging full speed at him, saying, "All right, let's do this," or something like that. When the police show up, Antifa, they're organized, they have lawyers, and they have training, refuse to cooperate and leave.
And they have a bail fund. And
the Proud Boys gladly explain to the police what happened, and then they get sentenced to 4 years in prison.
So I think it's a bigger problem than FBI agents or FBI managers are sympathetic. I think that as a general rule, government employees are sympathetic to things on the political left. Yeah. That's just the way that it works. If you work for the government and you believe in what you do, then you believe that, like, we need more taxes, we need to be able to fund my job. Like, people, there's a lot of non-essential government workers. We saw that in 2020. They didn't go to work. The traffic in DC was fantastic. I could drive anywhere I wanted, and nothing changed for any American citizen. Yeah, right. Nobody saw a fundamental difference in the way that they experienced the United States. So that's big. But if you'll give me 1 second to kind of like get wider with this, the idea that these people are sympathetic to it. It's dangerous because we're hiring more and more people that have a more and more college background. They are educated, but they are not common sense intelligence. The way the FBI has worked, everyone thinks that agents are running the FBI. Since I got in, and it goes way before then, probably a decade before I got there, the Agents Association, which is the group of like you just pay your dues and they'll give you like legal help, which didn't help me at all. But this group has been basically saying we want to move the FBI agent role back to the supreme role inside the agency. We want to make that the primary role of the FBI. And it is not. The people that are running the FBI are intelligence people. Intelligence people have two things that are really scary. Number one, they think they're entitled to information that's yours. And they don't need a warrant, and they don't think that way because it's national security. So, and they don't need a warrant, by the way, to get stuff like that. So warrantless searching is a thing under things like FISA 702 and national security letters and so on. The second thing is they spend a lot of time in university. They get people that have not just bachelor's, but master's degrees and PhDs, advanced training inside the university system, which is ideologically captured. And so when you have people that are ideologically captured to the political left, Antifa may be extreme for them, but it's not outside of the wheelhouse for them to support what they're about. Right. So they're not going to do it overtly ever, as Garret just said.
And they're going to say something like, oh, but those protesters are fighting for justice.
They're protecting our democracy.
Yeah, what was it in 2020? If you were going out to protest for George Floyd, that was part of the overall healthcare measure. Go ahead and do that.
Actually, the Colorado Sun said it lowered COVID rates that you were protesting. But if you were protesting against lockdowns, you were making it worse.
Yeah, imagine if you were protesting against masks. You were obviously a problem.
So we got swatted a
lot.
Well, I want to be careful because let me explain to everybody what we're talking about. We have had security instances 15 times, and I'm saying that vaguely because everybody assumes swatting means cops kick our door in and raid the house. Swatting is when someone calls the police or the feds or law enforcement, says falsely claims a crime is occurring to cause a police response. It does not mean a SWAT team kicks your door down. So after the second or third time, the first time they come in the building. Mm-hmm. I got mad and said, you have no right to come in here. And they called it exigent circumstances. Mm-hmm. And I said, no, it's not.
Yeah, based off an anonymous tip.
No,
I mean, that's...
And the fact that we're doing a live broadcast at the time, it's like, get out of here.
Right.
But I said, I can respect that you guys responded as quickly as you did. We appreciate the security, but at this point, we have all the employees. The show is live right now. There's no reason for you to come in, and you should have asked, blah, blah, blah. And also, it is my legal obligation to inform the police they are not welcome onto my property without a warrant. What ends up happening is the next several times, it is not the police coming into the building. However, we received a credible bomb threat, and I can't explain how it came to be, but we end up getting for 3 hours, we're all outside waiting, and the cameras are just live on the empty room with 50,000 people watching an empty room. They come in, with dogs, and they sweep the place. In total, we had 15 instances of death threats, which resulted in a police response. Some of them were the bomb squad. Some of them were men with rifles coming to a private property that I own elsewhere that no one has the access to, no one knows the address of. So there's certain techniques that people engage in to obfuscate properties that belong to them so that you can't search the records for them. Yep. And somehow, and I think we think we know how, one of these properties got swatted. We gave the information to, my understanding is it went to the FBI. It went to the Postal Investigative Service because packages were sent. Mm-hmm. And it went to local sheriff's departments and police departments, multiple agencies, no resolution. Nothing. And when our security team...
This is my shocked face, by the way.
When our security team reached out and asked, how is it that you can have 16 guys with rifles? I think it was, I don't know if it was, I think it was 16 guys showed up to one property with rifles, going across the property, sweeping through the windows and everything. Lights are all off, literally no one's there. And they were like, how have we not gotten any information? We've provided information. We, in fact, think we have strong evidence as to who did it. Never was anything done. In another instance, we have direct evidence and admission of guilt of a felony committed against one of our associates. Admission of guilt, public justification of why the felony was committed, and I'm trying to be very vague here but theft of intellectual property, identity theft, felony activity on the record, tracked digitally with a public admission, and they said, not interested. And I'm just like, well, how is this the case? That we can actually have someone gloat over their ideology and why they committed a felony against one of our associates. Provably, I gotta be careful.
They've gone towards intelligence. Intelligence people do not want to give you information.
And
no. But I'm saying
you're the wrong type of victim.
Exactly. I'm like, here's an open and shut case. They admitted they did it. And here are the victims.
Yep.
We have 12 victims of this felony, identity theft, etc., and a public justification for ideological reasons. And they said, we don't care.
Not a banded threat, as we would call it.
Yeah.
But we're talking about Antifa. So I'm trying to be very careful. We're talking about active Antifa ideologues, part of active cells who have publicly admitted to committing felonies. And they said, not interested.
Garret should explain to you how threats get banded and why that wouldn't be on it.
Yeah. First, though, so my faith is a huge part of what has kind of led me down this road as well. And Isaiah 10:1 says, "Woe to those who enact evil statutes and to those who constantly record unjust decisions." And I think we're in a very similar era where our government, our law enforcement, that's an unjust decision and an evil statute that if they decide not to enforce something that you have all that type of proof of, that's wickedness and evil. Mm-hmm. And that is something everyone should be waving the red flag about and saying, this needs to end. This needs to be fixed now. It's supposed to be, we're all supposed to be equally protected under our laws. It's clear we are not. Just the other day, Merrick Garland is testifying and saying, basically screaming about how we do not have a two-tiered system and we are not out to target any, specific sector of society.
Unless you're Catholic and you like the Latin
Mass.
Mass.
Right. It's if anybody who's truly paying attention, I mean, you can't believe anything that Merrick Garland, Christopher Wray, Joe Biden, nothing they're saying is true. I mean, it's evilness incarnate.
Let me give you a concrete example. When I was working in Las Cruces, New Mexico, so that's where I was working under the Albuquerque field office. We got the directives. I got moved to a national security squad because they thought I was a threat. They called me an insider threat, which is like a spy or a traitor. And so instead of working on an Indian reservation where I couldn't bother anybody, they moved me to the national security squad. I found out after the fact. It was the funniest thing that ever happened to me. So I'm sitting there. By the way, I didn't have the clearances at that point because I got read out. So I'm sitting on the squad doing nothing. I'm reading up. They're like, oh, yeah, you're going to be working counterterrorism cases, whatever. It's like, great. Awful. Like, it's the worst thing for me. And I'm reading. So I'm boning up on what's going on. What are called banded threats. The FBI basically takes out a list of threats that are predicated across the entire country, what they call the threat landscape. And there's analysts that their job, they're indoor dogs. All they do is they write term papers for a living, and then they get paid by the FBI. And they're writing what they think the threats are across the country. They send that to the field office, Albuquerque in particular, in my case. And they say, how do you rank them? We rank this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And the top, this is a tier 1 threat. This is a banded 2 threat. This is a banded 3 threat. This is an unbanded threat. Okay. How do you see it in your area? Because let's say that white supremacists are a tier 1 threat in New York City. I don't know. And then you go to Las Cruces and you're like, well, we don't really have any white supremacists out here. So it's an unbanded threat for us locally. So it's a national priority, but it's an unbanded local. The number 3 banded threat under the counterterrorism guys was anti-abortion protesters that were violent extremists. There were 2 abortion clinics in the state of New Mexico in 2021 when I was sitting there. One of them was a surgical facility in Albuquerque. The other was a pill mill in Anthony, which is like a tiny little town that nobody lives in near El Paso. That was the number 3 priority of the counterterrorism team to be looking into for ideology. Anti-abortion violent extremists. Do you know how many anti-abortion violent extremists have bombed or done anything in the last 30 years in New Mexico?
0?
Yeah, it's none.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't exist.
I think nationally.
So they investigated some ladies who were Catholic that were praying outside of the abortion clinic and went down and sent 2 agents to go interview them. Their entire purpose for being there. They owned an ultrasound, mobile ultrasound unit, which is expensive. And they would try to talk women who were coming in to get an abortion to have an ultrasound for free and see their baby and not kill the baby. That's what they were there for. That was the only reason that they were there. And they were investigated. And there was another guy who was a little bit unhinged, and his thing was he would walk around with this costume of babies that were like dolls, and they were spray painted red, and they were hanging around his neck from fake umbilical cords, which is a little bit outlandish. Yeah. But he walked around on the sidewalk, and there was no allegation of violence, and that's what they came down and investigated because that was the number 3 threat. There have been church bombings in New Mexico that have never been solved.
The crisis centers that were attacked, one was nearby,
but it was dark. Yeah. Merrick Garland already told us why they couldn't. It was dark, and it's hard to find people in the dark.
To be fair, it is
hard.
When it came to January 20th, 2017, Antifa, they're organized. They said everyone wear black hoodies and masks and black jeans.
They all blocked up.
Black bloc, they call it. That way, it makes it impossible for it makes it inevitable there is reasonable doubt in a court of law. So what happens is for a lot of these criminal proceedings, the lawyers, they love this. They say, how do you know it is my client that threw the brick. And I say, I clearly saw him. What was he wearing? He was wearing a black hoodie, black jeans, and he had a black mask on. I'd be like, how many other people were wearing black hoodies, black jeans, and black masks? 200, 300? So is it possible you singled out the wrong individual for arrest? No, I saw him do it and I grabbed and arrested him. You're absolutely certain with all those people there. And then they look at the jury and say, do you believe that? And the jury's like, yeah, it's possible he grabbed the wrong guy. Now, the cop is going to be like, he threw it and I immediately grabbed him. But reasonable doubt exists for the jury when they're going to say, I don't know. If I saw a crowd of 300 people all wearing the exact same thing, and that's all the defense has to do. And this is how they get
right,
them.
though, you can do that. So my kid that I arrested at the Disrupt J20. So there is the reason. I saw 3 people that were standing next to each other and a laser went up and I had a pretty good idea who it was, right? Mm-hmm. So you go, okay, well, it's one of those 3. That would be reasonable doubt, 100%.
Yep.
So we followed him. Because that's what you do if you're really good at this. You walk him. And he walked, and then he slipped the laser pointer out again, and then he fired it into a cop's windshield who was driving past him.
Wow.
And I was like, got it. I saw the light come from his hand. I saw exactly which one of those 3 it was. Then we honed in on him. Then we walked in, and I knew where the laser pointer was. It was on his right sleeve. Then we followed him, and he went into a falafel place. I think he was a little bit drunk too, because he'd been out there all day partying and being an asshole. So we follow him into the falafel place, and when he comes back out, he tries to get away from my buddy who's a Secret Service agent, and then me. And then we go and we frisk him, and sure enough, there it is. There's the laser pointer. See, that is how you lock somebody down into the story, because it's like, not only could I not have missed, he had a device that was used. If you found the person with the brick, I saw 2 bricks. He threw one. The other one was in his left hand. I grabbed him. He had the left hand. Then you get
So when it comes to laser pointers, I'm not going to explain how, but there's a technique activists are trained on to make it so that you can't see where the laser is emitted from.
Yeah.
And it's not complicated, but
I saw it happen.
No, I know. It's like there's 2 points where you can see a laser pointer, emission and contact.
Yep.
And
unless there's a tree.
But they're right. You or if there's fog, or you can then if it's
or tear gas.
Yep. Then the refraction of the
mirror.
No. In order to track where it comes from, you need something in the atmosphere that will refract the light, causing the beam to become visible. But these activists are trained on a very simple technique on how to make it so that you can't look at a person when they're. So I don't want to say too much, but they're given training on how to obfuscate this stuff. Mm-hmm. When it came to J20, 2017, the police could not identify who were smashing the windows, who were setting the fires, because they're all dressed the same. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is in this big cluster, someone will stand in the middle and do something, and there's literally no way. So what the police end up doing is, we call it kettling. I don't know what you guys call it. They pull out a net. They create a barricade. Or I don't know if they did a net. They surround the street with police. I tried getting out of the way. I'm there filming. I'm a journalist. Mm-hmm. I have press credentials and everything. And so as everyone's running through the street, I move left to a side of a building and I try to let them pass me by. All the rioters swarm around me and I'm like, son of a... And then the police form a barricade. I end up getting arrested. People on the right and the left have this hard on for saying I never got arrested for some insane reason. I was informed no less than 3 times by the police that were there, including the supervisor, that I'd been placed under arrest and I was not free to leave. I was not detained. I was arrested. Mm-hmm. I was not processed. And a local reporter called their boss. They said, we're going to put in a word to the police department and get you out of this arrest. I asked for a supervisor. The cops all surrounding us, stone-faced, saying nothing. And I said, I'm a journalist. Here's my press credentials. Can I speak with the supervisor? And then one cop goes like that. And there's a guy, I say, excuse me, sir. And he walks over. His name was Lieutenant Washington. And I said, just want to let you know I'm a journalist. And I hear from my press credentials. He goes, doesn't matter. You're under arrest. I'm like, that's totally fine, but it's my duty to inform you. Thank you, sir. After
there's a big difference between being arrested and being charged.
Exactly. Yeah. And so there's detained. You are detained. Yep. You are being questioned. You are being arrested.
Yep.
We were all under arrest. You're not free to leave. However, I did get released along with several other journalists. Eventually, he came back over and he says, which one of you is the journalist? And the news crew with the big camera wave, they're the ones who called it in. And he goes, pull them out. And I was like, Lieutenant Washington. And he goes, him too. Because I had politely asked him, he knew I had informed him.
You set up the parameters for that.
I'm like, look, if I get arrested, I get arrested, but it is my obligation to make sure they're aware, and then they can do whatever they want after the fact. Because when it comes to court, I'm going to say I did inform the officers as a journalist. Here's my press credential. He pulls me out, but my point is ultimately this: I'll add this too. Some of the lefty journalists who are clearly Antifa and far left aligned were screaming to the point of spitting in the face of these officers. How dare you arrest me? I'm a journalist, and now you ain't getting out. And so these journalists were saying things like, how did Tim Pool get released from the arrest or whatever? And
Oh, you were polite. That's what they always tell you
I'm
to do.
professional. I'm here doing my job. It is what it is.
Did you ever see Jon Stewart do his routine about he did a whole bit about the Vietnam press journalist who's screaming, "Mother effer, I'm professional,"
right.
because they're shooting bombs near him.
So what ends up happening for
So pissed.
all these guys
Old
that are
school.
arrested, they charged all of them with conspiracy because the police couldn't identify a single individual.
Yep.
They correctly, in my opinion, the federal government was correct to say these individuals conspired to riot and cause damage in Washington, D.C.
That's what a conspiracy should look like.
Yes.
You
and
actually
and
participated in it as well.
they were told what to wear.
Mm-hmm.
They're giving briefings. There is no reasonable argument that they did not realize what they were doing.
And they are executing
However,
tactics as a unit.
Yep. However, the jury, it's a D.C. jury, right?
Yeah, 95% positive. So
All
they're good.
booted out. There was a few people who pleaded guilty, and their lawyer said, "You're making a mistake. Don't do this. You're going to win." 95% of the individuals, there was like 217, had the charges dropped, despite the fact they engaged in a criminal conspiracy to destroy and riot and wanted to disrupt the inauguration of Donald Trump.
in the capital of the United States.
In the capital.
Of all places.
So you have people who coordinated a tactic to obfuscate their identities to cause destruction, damage in what I would describe as a very pathetic insurrection.
It was weak.
And they get no charges. Not only that, but the city of D.C. lost a lawsuit and was forced to pay them
I
out
just saw
millions
that.
of dollars.
It's crazy. Can we
Portland, the same thing.
Can we give some free
Denver
advice
as well.
to your audience? I think between Garrett and I, we could probably between the two of us, we could source just how not to get caught up into that, because people are getting caught up in this web. You mentioned that the sort of the tactic of going after domestic violent extremists, domestic terrorists, the way that they do it, they grab people. It's morally equivalent to entrapment. That's the way I call
Yep.
it. It's morally equivalent. If you saw it, you'd go, that's entrapment. Legally, it's not.
Right.
They can get away. They skirt the boundaries because that's the way the DOJ operates.
Entrapment requires coercion.
We can give you a real simple way to avoid this, and your audience will laugh about how stupid this is, but it's so simple. You want to give the original recruiting idea how that comes up?
FBI or whoever will see some post or something you did online or maybe even on Xbox Live or whatever, and they'll hear you talking and they'll say, there's my mark. And then they'll comment, they'll try to build up a friendship with you online, and eventually they will bump you more and more and more to try to coerce you into doing something more. And usually if someone online agrees with every idea you have,
Especially your worst and stupidest violent ones.
they're probably a Fed.
There's
of course.
There's another piece to it though, because people kind of know that. Okay, so it's like they agree with your worst ideas. They encourage them. They're willing to help you enact that stupid idea, and they're willing to do it for the exact amount of money that you happen to have. I use this absurd example all the time. Let's say that Ian decided he's Breaking Bad, he's filling the ammo can, and he's going to go do some real violence. And he's like, what we need to do is take down the government. They've been infringing our freedom. They're going to make us do, some kind of COVID tyranny. Screw that. I need a belt-fed machine gun. I need a thermal optic, and I'm going to post outside a fill-in-the-blank government building.
Truck pulls up and he
take
pulls
these assholes down.
Like,
Right?
look at all these things you just said you wanted.
And so you're like, I need these things. I need a $15,000 machine gun. I need a $20,000 thermal optic on it, and I want a suppressor that's going to handle that for another $5,000. So you've got $40,000 worth of equipment you need, but you only have $800 in your bank account. And then your Fed is going to be like, he's like, yeah, bro, you're totally right. Like, we totally got to do it. I know a dude. It's probably going to be hot off a truck, but he could get you all that stuff
for $8,000
for like $800, because they know what's in your bank account.
Well, so this is why on January 6th,
That's what you need to be watching for.
on January
It's
6th,
so stupid.
they
It's
were
sad.
chanting Fed at Ray Epps.
Of course.
Because he said to go in.
Yeah.
And I believe Mike Cernovich has pointed this out as well. And I pointed out as well, when we're having such tremendous victories like Bud Light losing $30 billion, Target losing billions of dollars,
Liberty Safe.
Disney, Netflix, Liberty Safe in panic over what they did. And then you have the successes of Sound of Freedom. You have the successes of Richmond, North of Richmond. These are massive cultural victories, which will change the shape of this political conflict because politics is downstream from culture. Then you get someone coming into our super chat saying something stupid about 1776. It's time. We have to go do this. And
love those
like,
guys.
that's a Fed. Like the key to victory right now, I can't tell you what happens after 2024. I don't know. But right now, the polls are showing Trump winning.
Yeah.
Democrats are in disarray. Joe Biden's too old.
Well, even people that are leftists know, like they look at their 401k and they're like, I'm not going to be able to retire. By the way, housing prices have gone up 40% in 4 years. This is not a sustainable thing, no matter what you believe.
I'm sorry if
time to tamp it down.
If Bud Light loses $30 billion, that shows that in the minds of the average person, they are active in this culture war. Okay, Bud Light, the number one drink in the country, not anymore, but number one. That means your average person is drinking it. 30%.
It's a blue collar drink. I ran a blue collar bar in the rural part of Kansas.
30%
not far from where you used to work.
So I look at it this way. Bud Light is a great indicator of when they say you got to go touch grass, Tim. You're too online. Okay, well, when 30% of Bud Light drinkers stop, that shows. Let's just do a 1-for-1. Bud Light is an average person kind of drink, and they lost 30% of their market share, 30% of their sales. Sounds to me like you could reasonably say 30% of it's a great polling metric, by the way. 30% of the American people are paying attention to the point where they're politically active enough to switch beers. I'm telling you that translates to everything else.
And it's measurable because beer is a consumable. It's not like oh, did they change car brands?
The consumable.
No, like you're not going to get rid of your car because Toyota does something crazy. It's like you got it, you cracked it, it's gone. Are you going to buy more, or are you going to go and get a Yingling? Are you going to go and buy like a Coors or something else? Like you're going to change brands.
They say
it's immediately measurable.
They say beer is the reason for human civilization. That when humans that were nomadic figured out how to create beer, they had to stop traveling around to create it.
For the fermentation.
It was like, hey, we figured this thing out. This stuff rocks.
We got to sit here for 5 days.
Exactly.
And then maybe another 1 or 2 after that.
This river's really good too.
And then what happened was they were like, we need more of this grain to make more of this. Let's start planting it.
This is going to take a while.
So that may or may not be just myth and apocryphal or whatever.
Do you remember Mitch Hedberg? Do you remember the comedian? Of course. Right? He does this thing about when
his voice is the best.
Yeah, so he's from Austin. I live in Austin. I love Mitch, and like one of the, and of course he's passed away. But one of the funny, great things he says is when someone mishears you and you order scrambled eggs, or you order like a chicken breast or something. He's like, I want a chicken sandwich, and the lady's like, yeah, how do you want your eggs? And he's like, oh, I want them laid, and then fertilized, and then cracked, and then scrambled, or whatever he says, like a raised and fertilized, and then and then like hatched, and then like moved on. He goes through the whole process. He goes, screw it, scrambled. Like I'll just take it how it is. It's like those people had to make that decision when the grain was planted. It's like, oh shit, I guess we're gonna be here for a season.
But my point with all of that is,
it makes sense.
I don't understand why people are like, we're not losing. Disney lost $1 billion on their last 10 releases or whatever. Netflix was bleeding out subscribers. You're seeing these like BlackRock trying to say, no, we're not doing ESG. We're not doing ESG because investors
changed the name.
Of course. They still want to do it. But I'm saying they're scared of what's being said. You look at the victories in terms of parental rights and education bills. You look at gun rights. How many states are constitutional carry?
Look what they just did in New Mexico.
I know.
What a panic step on a landmine that you didn't know was there.
And then she tries again. They look.
If you want to go find a place that is going to be full blue, the bluest place you can find.
Democrat trifecta.
Okay, New Mexico. You want to find the one thing that you can piss everybody off on in that state that is full of ranchers and outdoorsmen and people that go hunting. Screw with their gun rights.
So ultimately, my point comes to winning does not mean won. It does not mean that everything's over. It means we have all of these victories, which are accomplished through recording podcasts, making jokes, selling beers. The Daily Wire sells chocolate and razors. And all of these things contribute to a change in culture, which is routing the extremists on the left. For someone to come out and claim that there's a requirement for violence or something is you're a Fed.
For what it's worth, it doesn't mean that it doesn't get really bad for a while.
No, of course.
People should understand that, like, if you're not looking around and going like,
where are my exits?
You need to know your exits. You need to know what your plan is. You better figure out how you can go for a couple days without food. You might need a water purifier. Like you might it's probably the people that are in the places that are least prepared. Like if you're in an urban area and there's a lot of that's where population density equals danger, in my opinion.
Let me put it this way.
At this point. You guys are good out here. This is a better spot.
The decree from the governor of New Mexico is a threat of force and violence against you from the state if you try to exercise your rights.
Correct.
And she lost. We didn't have to do anything to gain those rights other than vote, file the paperwork, buy a different beer. Just by living and being successful, and the conservatives who had more kids than liberals, we are entering a place where all of these victories are happening. It did not used to be the case up until like 2008 that you could, DC versus Heller, where you actually had the modern version of gun rights. So you could carry a weapon wherever you want. And then you actually had the more recent Supreme Court ruling Victory, 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 victory. It's all procedural. Donald Trump gets elected, 3 Supreme Court justices, sitting back, succeeding, having a family, protecting your family, speaking out for what you believe in is leading to victories across the board. And then you get people coming out arguing for violence. And I'm like, you're a Fed.
Yeah,
you're a leftist.
We're outbreeding them, by the way. Garret and I just by ourselves. Like,
I got a general
I got
question.
4 and he's got 4.
For both you guys, having served in the FBI, like, do you think there's value to have a secret police force in the United States?
No.
I'd
swear there's the like it's the scariest shit you could ever have.
Because other countries have them too. So if we don't have one, we're basically with our pants down geopolitically. So I understand. But it's when it gets turned inward that it becomes an issue.
Yeah.
Is there a way to have one without turning it inward?
No, of course not. Yeah. It's the ring of power. Okay. And I grew up reading Tolkien. It's the ring of power. Everyone thinks they can wield it. Everyone thinks I have the moral character. Let's say you can, but your son can't. You pass it down to the next generation. Someone's going to fail in that line of dynasty. It cannot be wielded. I actually had this conversation with Seb Gorka, who was actually an instructor for counterterrorism resources. He would teach FBI analysts and agents how to understand terrorist ideology. And so Seb's kind of a neat guy. He's also a gun guy, which I like a lot. And so the two of us were talking about this, and he said, I can't even brag to my European friends anymore that we don't have a secret police. The FBI is an intelligence agency first, primarily. You know how I know it? Because they told us. Yeah. You can actually go, your viewers can go on, they can search what's called the DIOG. It's the Domestic Investigations Operation Guide. That is the FBI playbook on how they institute investigations. Well, and most of it is unredacted.
They can, easier than that. I'm on FBI.gov right now. There's a timeline. The section 2001 to 2008, it literally says, for the FBI and the nation, a new era of national security had begun. And then it gets into more about 9/11 and how intel needs to be the most important. Here, right here. The key to that new mandate, Director Mueller knew, was intelligence, the holy grail of national security work, the ability to collect and connect the dots, to know your enemies and the threats they pose inside and out, to arm everyone from leaders in the Oval Office to police officers on the street, blah, 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 blah. Come out and tell you.
It's right there. I went to FBI to go. It says what we investigate, intelligence is a.
It's the primary thing. When you look at the DIOG, which tells you how you can open a case, what the predication has to be, what the levels of cases are. We do things that are called. There's no probes, by the way. You'll be shocked to learn this. Of all the FBI probes that you've read about in headlines, there's no such thing as an FBI probe. It's either an assessment, which there are multiple types, or it's an investigation, and the investigations are either a preliminary or a full. That's it. Those are the 3 things: assessment, preliminary, full. And all of those, the first thing they say, it's FBI as intelligence agency, is the number one thing they talk about. Then they run through it. Then it goes FBI as a law enforcement.
Well, the FBI was originally called something else, wasn't it?
It was called the Bureau of Investigation. Yeah. They lie about when they were founded. The Bureau of Investigation was founded in 1908. Okay. It was founded in 1908. In 1934 or 35, it became the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This was all under Hoover. The same guy ran it, but they changed names. Go look at the United States Air Force. It was originally called the Army Air Corps. The first day of the Army Air Corps turning into the Air Force is the Air Force birthday. They don't claim like, well, we were created during World War II in the 1944. They're like, no, they claim it's either 1947 or 48. My Air Force friends are going to be pissed at me that I don't remember. But in September of 47 or 48, I believe, the Air Force became the Air Force by decree, and it became something else. Look at the DOD. It used to be called the Department of War. Yeah. When it became the Department of Defense, it had a new birthday. When you change your name and become a new entity, you get a new birthday. The FBI claims 1908, and it's lying.
Well, here's what
we gotta call it the Department of War again.
I know, 100%.
Well, I call it the Department of Offense. So the history of the FBI says in 1896, the National Bureau of Criminal Identification was founded, providing agencies across the country with information to identify known criminals. The 1901 assassination of President William McKinley, created a perception that the United States was under threat from anarchists. The DOJ and Labor had been keeping records on anarchists for years, but Theodore Roosevelt wanted more power to do so. The Justice Department...
like a secret police? I don't know.
Well, so what it says is, on May 27, 1908, Congress forbade this use of Treasury employees, the Secret Service, by the Justice Department, citing fears that the new agency would serve as a secret police department. Right. Again, at Roosevelt's urging, Bonaparte moved to organize a formal Bureau of Investigation, which would then have its own staff of special agents. So how are you? You're saying that they've been around for a lot longer than that.
Well, no, they came around in 1908. That was when it became the Bureau of Investigation. So you went back into the 19th century. That was the initial. That was like them basically trying to figure out are there patterns of crimes. They were first learning about how to do fingerprints and stuff like that. That's what Hoover was famous for. He basically got the first national archives of fingerprints and things. So he was organizing that, and he was a young, ambitious guy. The Attorney General Bonaparte basically has this created as the Bureau of Investigation, 1908. The FBI claims that as their birthday, 1908, because it gives them legitimacy. They're only 89 years old, but they want to claim to be over 100 years old.
Right.
Why would you do that? For legitimacy, for that patina of legitimacy, which I think
what's their real birth date?
1934 or 35. I think it's 1935 Act of Congress.
They say the creation of the FBI was 1933. The Bureau of Investigation was linked to the Bureau of Prohibition. Rechristened the Division of Investigation. It became an independent service.
So there was 1 year where it was called something else, and then the FBI specifically 35.
35, you're correct. Yep.
Yeah, so that's the real birthday. And if you're an honest agency, why would you lie about your birthday? You know what? Meet a woman and ask her what her birthday is. If she lies about that, she's going to lie about other things. That's weird. That's a weird thing to do.
They could argue 1896 according to the.
Well, they might. Don't give them any ideas.
Right. But can we abolish it?
Can we or will we?
Well, I mean, so let me put it this way: there are a lot of people who say abolish. A lot of people say defund. And the reason I bring it up is because there have been arguments made that the president can, by executive order, just say no more FBI.
Yeah,
that's Vivek's claim.
It's part of the executive branch. So I think, there's a groundwork that could be laid for that. I don't think it's going to happen.
Would it even be a good idea?
Yeah, for sure.
You think so?
Here's why. Let me throw why. In 2020, under the COVID hysteria, my field office, which was the second biggest field office in the country, I think Washington Field is the second biggest. It's New York, and then it's either LA or DC. One of the two, top three, doesn't matter. They told everybody in the biggest thing that if you listen to Attorney General Garland yesterday, is it yesterday that he was talking or is it the day before?
Day before.
Two before.
Yeah.
So Wednesday, when he was talking, he said the most important things the FBI does are all national security related. That's what he said. His words, not mine. I don't care. They shut down national security in Washington, D.C. They had the national security agents, of which there were probably a couple hundred, working on all the threats in the national capital region, which you would think would be a big deal. All the spies, all the traitors, all the terrorists try to do bad things. They had them show up for 30 minutes a day, 2 times a week. They took a 50-hour-a-week job. They made it 1 hour a week. And did you see anything crazy happen in 2020? Nobody did. Nobody popped off. The Chinese still stole our technology. They do that anyway. They do it all day. We didn't see some massive surge of the Klan coming over and taking over anything. We just watched what happened when you take them down from doing their job to doing no job for 1 hour a week. And apparently we could reduce the FBI by 50x, not a small amount. You could destroy that in that area, and nothing happened. And nobody knew about it. In the same way that when we had a quote unquote government shutdown and people don't go to work,
nobody notices.
Nobody notices. If you work, the things that touch you for government are your local government. If the police stopped enforcing speed laws around you, people would do weird stuff. If they stopped investigating burglaries, people would get burgled. If you stopped investigating any of the things that are close by to you, either your police department or your sheriff's deputies, if they weren't doing their job, you would freaking notice. You can see it in places like Baltimore. You saw it in Ferguson. I know you guys have some experience with seeing that stuff. When that happens, it gets rowdy. When you take away the feds, they still don't investigate your $1 million fraud. And you still won't notice it. It doesn't matter. So what you could do is you could take that $11 billion, that $9 to $11 billion a year that we spend on the FBI. And what if you put that into a program where we cross-deputized senior state police officers who have a lot of time on the job and have been doing things well. And you said, not only do you have state authorities, which means they're going to be accountable to an attorney general that's elected in their state. That's good. You say not only that, but what if we just said you're cross-deputized under Title 21 and Title 18 to pursue federal crimes as well? So now your state police have the ability to bring a case to the Justice Department and say, hey, we're going to prosecute this federally. This is a federal crime. It crosses state lines, and I'm deputized to do so. But let's say it doesn't cross state lines. Now they have the state authority. And if that person sucks, they have to theoretically answer to their attorney general, who actually is elected. So you would have 50 independent laboratories of good ideas instead of one centrally run one out of DC with Chris Wray, who's a guy who was making $9.2 million the year before he started working as the FBI director.
Wow, what was he doing?
He's a lawyer. He's a white shoe lawyer. He was the guy that fixed Chris Christie's Bridgegate scandal. Do people know that?
And Chris Christie is the guy who recommended Ray to President Trump.
So you've got a guy who was making $9.2 million the year before he became the FBI director, and now he makes $235,000 a year. Does anyone have any problems with what went on there? Why would you do that? Can any of you imagine walking away from $9 million a year and taking the decimal point at the end of your salary?
You're bringing in $750 a month or something like that.
Yeah, that's some social capital right there.
There's something very big happening there. And you know how I know that he's not committed to it?
He's a prince now.
I call him politically appointed princes. Yeah. He flies around in a private jet that the American taxpayer funded. It's a $60 million aircraft, a Gulfstream 550. I did a piece with Brandon Dre over at Daily Wire. We wrote a whole expose. They could impeach him over that alone. The way that he uses the private jet of the FBI, he flies around. Do you want to know what he actually pays back? Because he has to fund his personal travel. He has a security detail that drives him in a motorcade down to a plane. He's so lazy about this stuff, and he's so arrogant that Chris Wray has the jet, which lives in Manassas, Virginia. You guys know where that is. It flies to DCA, Reagan. It lands. It costs us $2,500 as a taxpayer to land at DCA just for the runway fee for the private jet.
But that's like
plus whatever it costs for a 30-minute flight from Manassas to Virginia. It's like 41 miles.
Yeah.
Okay. It flies 41 miles to meet him closer, so he doesn't have to sit on Route 66 on US 66 and drive out to where the
That's just
hangar
the
is.
suburbs. I'm like, what?
Yeah, correct.
That's just the suburbs.
It flies to him at DCA. He gets on the plane and then he flies to wherever he goes. Usually home to
what is that,
Atlanta.
a 2-minute flight?
It's between 15 and 20 minutes, depending on the pattern.
To fly? Oh, because you can't just
You
go
have
up
to-
and down.
yeah, right. You don't just direct fly. You have to fly up, then you have to fly into the pattern, then you have to fly around DCA, then you land. So it's short as 13 minutes, as long as like 21 or 22 minutes. People can actually go check out this plane in real time. It's a government aircraft. We all pay for it.
Look, man, traffic around DC. Oof.
Right.
41 miles could be an hour and a half.
$10,000 per flight is what I've been told the estimate is between wear and tear on the aircraft, the cost of operating the crew rest that they get from the flight, and the fact that we pay $2,500 in fuel and everything else. $2,500 just to touch down on the runway. People can actually check it out. It's all aircraft have a tail number, and his is November 708 Juliet Hotel. November 708 JH. That is our jet that the FBI flies for Chris Wray. It was bought under $60 million with the counterterrorism resources. It is supposed to be used for the counterterrorism investigation teams that go around and pick up, like let's say a big shooting happens. Let's say Las Vegas happens. You're supposed to fly an evidence team in that jet out there to do it. But they have to wait until Chris Wray is done using it because he uses it to fly home to Atlanta where his family lives and he lives. He's a geo bachelor 5-6 days out of the week because he didn't even commit after appointed for 10 years. He didn't even commit to living in DC with his family. His wife still lives outside of Atlanta. So if you go look at the Flight Aware, which people can do publicly, it's like a free resource. You could pull up where that jet goes. And here's what it does. On a Friday afternoon, it flies from Manassas to Reagan Airport. It lands. He gets on it. It flies him to Fulton County down in outside of Atlanta. He gets off it. It flies back to Atlanta. It sits there for the weekend. Then it flies back on Monday morning and picks him up, or Sunday night. Then it flies him back to DCA, drops him off because it's closer to the office. Then it flies back to Manassas where it lives. So we now have 6 flights for a man to basically just fly home for the weekend. And do you know what he pays for that? Because that's private travel. That's personal travel. He has to reimburse the American taxpayer. Do you know what he pays?
What?
Like $200. Because he finds whatever the cheapest one-way flight is or the cheapest round trip on Spirit Airlines, and that's what he's responsible for paying out of his pocket. So he pays the commercial equivalent to the region. It could be a Spirit Airlines flight from Baltimore to like near Atlanta, and that's what he has to pay. It has to be in the same region. It doesn't even have to be the same airports because he flies into the private jet terminal. Yep. The dude is paying like $200 a flight for a round trip that costs the American taxpayer probably upwards of like $50,000 or more.
Sounds like corruption.
Yeah. It sounds like a really good deal if you can get it. That's why he thinks he's a prince.
On top of that, he's got all sorts of strap hangers who go with him everywhere. He's got his own security detail. And if you're going for multiple days, you're taking multiple shifts because those guys aren't working 24 hours a day, but there has to be a security detail awake on him and his house or wherever he is, his hotel, wherever he is in the world, 24 hours a day. You got the flight crew who now they're in Atlanta over the weekend. All these people are getting paid overtime for working the weekend or weekend differential pay and night shift pay and all sorts of bonus pay for.
They bring in the local SWAT teams because those guys exhaust all the hours where they can. At some point in time, if you're a federal agent, you actually do enough overtime, and there's only the people that are basically on protective details get it. But if you work enough overtime hours, you eventually start working for free because there's a cap at 174,000 and change or 176,000 changes year to year, like a little bit. But once you hit that amount of numbers, you can't make any more money. So when you're working overtime, they're actually not paying you the overtime rate. You're just doing it for free. And so at some point in time, those guys don't want to work for free. So they bring in local SWAT teams, which Garret was on the SWAT team in Kansas City, and they'll bring in the SWAT team who gets overtime pay so they can spread the love around so that everybody gets paid overtime, basically just sitting in a van, like hanging out, waiting for the FBI director to wake up.
I think it's beyond just the FBI. I think.
Oh, for sure.
We're looking at just the degradation of our institutions. Mm-hmm. It has become. Someone tweeted out, no one is trying to solve the problems. They're trying to get wealthy enough so the problems don't affect them.
Do you want to know what was on my screensaver when I was sitting my last couple of days in the office? Which probably didn't help. I had one of those demotivator posters that was like tiled across my unclassified computer, and it said government. If you think we have problems, you should see our solutions. That was number one. And then the other one I had was consultants. If you're not going to be part of the solution, there's a ton of money to be made keeping the problem going.
Yep.
And so those are the two favorite things that like anybody who's worked in government knows those are true.
There's a concern that if we were to disband the FBI, if we were to shut it all down, that a lot of people would get fired and that they would go form their own paramilitary corps. Do you guys get that?
Sounds awesome.
That's what like the Ba'ath Party did in Iraq when we went in and just eradicated Saddam's government. They said, you can't work in the government anymore, you're out. They formed their own political ISIS. They formed.
Overwhelmingly, people that carry a gun for a living of all ilk, whether they be in law enforcement or military, they tend to be relatively libertarian-minded conservatives who don't want to get into your business. I would say that's been my experience. I was in the military. I've been in law enforcement in 2 different areas, and I was a paramedic before that, and I rolled around with law enforcement a lot. They don't want to mess with you. So having a bunch of armed people that care about your liberty sounds like not a problem to me. That's just me. They're not going to go out there. Now, the reason the FBI is slanted the way it is because agents only make up about just under 14,000. They're like 13,600 and change FBI agents. But there's
of like a 40,000 person institution.
But there's 37,000, something like that, whatever it is. It's under 40,000, but it's over 35,000. So even though the majority of agents are relatively conservative minded, libertarian is probably better. They just are apolitical about a lot of stuff. They don't want to get involved. Even though they make up the majority of the people that carry the guns, they are the minority of the agency. And that's the case everywhere. When you have the majority of people that are interested in government and they work for the government, they're going to grow government. And they're the ones that are driving the train. Big time. It's scary stuff for people that have any interest in it because you look and you go, this doesn't make sense. People go, well, FBI agents are conservative. So what? They're not the ones telling people what to do. And then ordinary men.
They're just doing it.
Ordinary men, they do what they're told.
Yeah, Vivek said that when he's going to shut down the FBI, that it's going to basically terminate the positions of a lot of the bureaucrats and that the agents themselves will be
his
moved to
numbers
the
are a little
Rangers.
off, but his ideas are good.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We were just reading it on the way. It's like some of his numbers, it's like, dude, you don't need that many people doing counterterrorism investigations and national. He doesn't actually know because he hasn't worked in there. I've talked backstage with Vivek and we've talked about like, I would love to consult with him. I was like, look, your numbers are off, but your ideas are good. Let me just say it very clearly. You have to put out a number if you're going to be a guy that's serious. You have to put out a thing. I would get rid of this number of positions and so on. His heart is in the right place and his ideas would work fine. We would want to give some input about how to tweak it.
So you don't think the bureaucrats would go form their own like anti-American organization?
If you take the bureaucrats out of the equation, okay, the bureaucrats are the tyrants in this scenario, and they think they have power, and they use the power that they currently have, and they try to grow that power. If you take their positions away and you disintegrate them into moon dust, they don't have any power left. And they're not gun toters. They're sitting in headquarters thinking they're solving all the world's problems when, in fact, they're making things worse for normal Americans by and large.
Think about Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals. Any power that your enemy thinks you have, you have.
Yeah.
And so they use it. But the minute that they don't have it, they don't have it. The minute that people go like, no, imagine if 2,000 or 3,000 FBI agents who are out there who are doing this stuff and are disgusted, because there's a lot of them. We literally had this conversation this morning before we got to the studio. I'm talking to my buddy Steve Friend, and he goes, dude, if I was still working for the FBI right now, and I saw Kyle Seraphin, a Garret O'Boyle, a Steve Friend out there talking about all the things that we talk about over a beer, about how jacked up the FBI is, and they're out there saying it publicly, and they got canceled for it, and they literally got canceled because they said they weren't going to do something that was wrong. He's like, I'd want to eat my gun. He's like, I would want to commit suicide. I would be like, I am doing something shameful and dishonorable. I'm not encouraging anybody to go do that, obviously. I don't think that's the right answer. But it's like, how jacked up is it that you're looking around? People go, how come nobody's out there supporting what you guys are saying?
Well, look at Veritas. Well, Veritas isn't around anymore.
No, but I'm friendly with the people that were there.
Look at how these investigations used to go. Yeah. You have these people who in private over a beer will admit to malfeasance and corruption and then panic and beg when people find out.
That's right.
Because they have no problem engaging in evil so long as no one knows they're doing it.
My actual boss, when I told him that I was not going to do a nasal swab for any reason for every 72 hours because I didn't have the disease and I have thousands and thousands of clinical hours training on disease process. I've worked in hospitals and I've worked on ambulances and I've done probably hundreds, if not thousands of nasal swabs for the flu. And nobody knows what happens when you put ethylene oxide up your nose, like into a mucosal membrane every 72 hours. That's crazy. Like they never tested that. Nobody knows. It's a carcinogen. So, if you tested for COVID I hope everyone's okay. But I wasn't going to do it under any circumstances. I tell my boss and he goes, on principle, I agree with you, but I've got mortgage. I've got an alimony because I have an ex-wife and, I just can't stand between it. So I lost my paycheck for 2 months over this because it was important enough for me to do it. Yeah. And I just look at I got little kids, man. I've got a baby right now who's like 25 days old. and I've got 3 other kids, and what am I going to tell them when we look into a country full of tyranny? Am I going to go, look, at least your dad had a roof over your head during this time. I did nothing about it. I wasn't going to be that guy. That's just not the kind of guy I am.
That's why James says be brave. And now obviously he's doing OMG, O'Keefe Media Group, and Veritas is gone. But the idea is he put this tweet out saying that if essentially, I'm going to paraphrase him because I don't remember the exact words, but he was like, if you're participating in this, you are responsible for the future your children receive.
Let me say it easier. You cannot comply your way out of tyranny.
Right.
Period.
Yeah.
You can't. And the other thing that I've been saying, and if anybody who's older than about 35 years old, anybody who's over about 35 years old will know this. The United States that I grew up in would have invaded the United States that we live in right now. I'm just saying.
Well, the funny thing is about the 2020
totally
election,
happen.
A lot of the things that people were pointing out in 2020 are used by the U.S. as a metric of a bad election in a foreign country.
For sure.
Yeah,
I asked guys that work for the CIA, because I got some buddies that are like CIA whistleblowers. They haven't come to public. Being a whistleblower doesn't mean you went to the media, by the way. It means you went through one of the approved routes.
Right.
And so I've got friends that have gone through the approved routes as best they can. And he literally goes, the number one thing you do when there is the potential for election corruption is you do paper ballots.
Yeah.
One person, one vote, identification of who that person is. Oh, you mean like apparently that's all racist if you're in America, but anywhere else you do it because that's how you legitimize elections.
Yeah, I was in Iraq in 2008 and 2009, and we were there at an election time, and I think it was the first time women got to vote, or if it wasn't the first, it's one of the first. And for like 48 hours or so heading into the election, it was like every platoon, like you're gonna just be awake and you're gonna be out patrolling to ensure that we can have as safe of an election as possible. And it was all paper ballots.
Yeah.
And we were out until all the ballots were reported, safely transported to, wherever they were taking them in each province.
Well, there's an incentive for nation builders to have a real election in the nation that they're trying to build. But in the United States, where you're trying to seize and maintain power,
Exactly.
is a different question.
Yep.
Yeah, once you have the power, it's something different. Garrett and I were doing this riff. I was driving yesterday or the day before, and we're talking on the phone, and we were talking about, people go, it couldn't happen in America. That's why people think it is. This I would call it the myth of American exceptionalism, that we're such a special type of people that we would never have a tyrannical, overtaking, and that people would not obey the tyrannical orders and they would do the right thing when push comes to shove. Even though I went and I told people they had to have masks, and even though I locked down churches because I'm a cop and I did the wrong thing, I would never put a baby in the wood chipper. Like, that's the idea that they would have. Like, whenever the line comes up, I would cross. You ever heard of a soft sale? You're familiar with any sales technique? The soft sale is when I get you saying yes.
Oh, we
It's
call
like-
it we call it the yes train.
It's the same idea, right?
Yeah.
So any kind of salesperson knows that soft sale, yes train, I get you saying yes. Hey, Ian, if I solved a problem that you had and it cost the amount of money you had, would you be interested in that? Yes. Yeah. It's like, man, I found this really, really great fashion manufacturer, and they're going to sell you like toe socks that actually feel like you're not wearing socks. Would that be interesting to you?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay, right. So I get you say yes.
So
look, and how much do you think you could afford something like, $1 a day for a pair of socks?
I think so.
The way-
Okay, so yes. You've been saying yes all over the time, and then suddenly you get to the point where you're saying yes, I'm tossing the baby in the wood chipper, or yes, you're shooting a toddler in the back of the head because they're so slow getting on the boxcar.
The yes train in fundraising, they say get the person to say yes 7 times, and they will give you their money.
It's soft sales.
Yeah.
The technique it's well established. I love that your chat, by the way, said that I'm on meth because they think that I'm talking too quickly. It's the second time that they've done that.
You'd say something like, you think overpollution is a problem, right? Like, pollution's a problem, right? Yeah, and
I don't care.
And
I'm the worst client. I'm a contrarian.
Nobody says
Definitely
that.
not.
That just will never happen.
Right,
Like,
because there's a social pressure on what you're starting with.
well,
Yeah.
because it is it's universally accepted that we shouldn't.
You don't want your
pollute.
kids to live in a place full of pollution, do you?
And so you ask them these questions as you're doing your pitch, and you'd be like, right. Obviously, you want to help, don't you? Yes,
Of course.
And that's your 6th yes, and the last yes is, so just hand me your credit card, okay? Okay, here you go.
That sounds like a struggle session where they're like, just one thing you don't like about the U.S.
No, that's
just
not
tell me one
struggle
thing.
session. That's not a struggle session. A
No,
struggle
what is
session-
that called?
So that's just I
It's like what they would do with prisoners to get them
right.
to turn on their country slowly, one
Right.
day at a time,
A struggle-
one
a struggle
little
session-
problem at a time. Tell me about your country.
A struggle
Just one.
session would be you surround someone by people screaming at them and humiliating.
Not what I was thinking
humiliating
of,
them,
yeah.
cancel culture and things like that.
It's social. We do it online all the time now.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a digital struggle session that happens in pretty much any of the echo chambers. If you walk into, and I know you do, and I do it as well, you walk into the space where people are not agreeing with you, and you just like, I'll get the what do they call them? The fellas, the NAFOs, whatever they're called. The
the
pro
Kinzinger
Ukraine
types?
lunatics.
Oh no, I don't know.
Oh, I'll just be like, I don't care if Ukraine loses. Like, I actually don't. I actually just don't. I just don't care.
They did lose.
Yeah, they got into a fight with Russia. So Russia lost 20 million people in World War II. The number of people that Russia is willing to throw into an armed conflict it defies Western capabilities to even appreciate.
It's not just that. I think it's fair to say that I'm looking at the battle maps and I'm like, oh, Russia seized the entire land bridge into Crimea and they're pushing into Odessa. Tell me again how every report they put out about the success of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, it's just not true.
I think that,
and they can do it forever. Like they will just conscript people. They've done it.
Well,
before.
I don't even believe at this point. Look, we get a year and a half where they keep saying Russia routed, Russia losing troops, Russian defectors, Russian troops begging on camera, and then it's like a year later, Russia has the Donbass and the land bridge to Crimea, and I'm like, wait, so they won?
Right?
They seized.
They lost their way to winning.
Well, they were losing the whole time, and now they're in control of the region.
If we just give Ukraine more money, Tim, then
I think the control of that eastern Donbass basically provides 20 to 30% enhancement of their GDP. Like their gross domestic product's going to go off the charts up because they have Black Sea and Mediterranean access for trade, whereas we lose very little for ceding that. And it'd be like if the entire west coast of the United States, a stripped down the west coast, was owned by Canada all the way down. We had no Pacific coast access. We would have gone to war with Canada to take that access.
Well, we went to war with Mexico and did that.
So in fact, we almost took took all of Mexico, but the president, I think it was Polk at the time, was like, "I'm just going to arbitrarily give Mexico back."
So I think with the amount to gain, the amount that Russia has to gain from Sevastopol and that Black Sea access is just that they'll throw everything, the amount that they'll throw at it relative to everybody else to stop a minor loss. I mean, obviously, I'm not speaking for the Ukrainian people losing their territory is horrible. Obviously,
Ukrainians getting conscripted and being thrown on the front is bad. But what I said is this. I don't care. We have other problems that I'm more interested in that are closer to my babies. Yeah. So I don't care. And if I say that online, to go to the struggle session piece, if I say online that I don't care what happens in Ukraine, it's like I don't have the bandwidth for that. I always tell people that they're following these laser pointers of outrage. You know, there's like, you ever take a cat and do the laser pointer?
We were talking about last night. Talking plasma. It's military tech.
You're like, and you attack the laser, right? And so like you'll see the cat attacks carpet, goes after your couch, whatever. You're distracting the cat. That's the American people with the outrage factory. But where's the dot coming from? It's coming from a hand that's way away. It's never going to get struck. So if people are constantly like, oh, Ukraine, I'm furious. Oh, like this is happening. Oh, that's happening. All the anger. I'll just go in and say I don't care, and then you'll get this swarm of wild animals. This is the struggle session that goes on online, where they'll mob your feed, they'll come into your timeline. It's a digital struggle session.
But they won't go and fight it.
But then I'll just none of them are on the front. Then I'll just turn off Twitter and go outside and hang out with my kids, and I don't care. If you could do that, that's the thing we were kind of getting towards.
You think somebody or some group of people is holding the laser pointer of outrage, or do you think it's just an emergent phenomenon?
So that's the concept of what is a deep state, and let me dig into, and I'll have Garrett's thought on as well, but. Everybody uses the word deep state, and I hate it. I actually told Vivek that he can't use that word because it's a sexy word. It's like an emotional word. Deep state, the idea of it is like people have these images of like people handing dossiers and like, you know, dark alleys, or they're hanging out at parking garages, like the deep throat idea. And there's like information exchange. The deep state is actually the administrative state, because administrative is like the least sexy thing in the world. Yeah. It's like a guy sitting in like 1980s carpet with like shitty fluorescent lighting at a desk that's been there forever. It's got a coffee stain from his predecessor who put a pot on it. And he just hangs out there and he's doing like administrative stuff. It's a lot of people that have the similar interests, and their interest is, can I make enough money? Can I survive in the government long enough? Am I going to outlast this president, which they will? And can I grow my department enough that I can go and get a big job at like GE, one of the industrial complexes, whether it be military industrial or information industrial or healthcare industrial complexes? Can I build a system that I can walk into and make a bunch of money? And so it's a bunch of people that have the same goals, but they're not coordinating. There's not like a text stream of a bunch of people like at the DOJ, like, how do we F over all the Trump supporters? They just all hate the Trump supporters. And so they all just do things that screw Trump supporters. That's administrative state. And so I don't think there's one hand holding any laser pointer. It's not the X-Files, which would be really cool, by the way. If there was a bunch of people that met in like trench coats and like smoked cigars in a room, there's probably some of those people somewhere doing something, but it's not the things that are running our government, at least not on the, like, they don't have their hand on the lever.
I think it's much easier to combat emergent phenomenon than a cabal, personally. So that gives me hope.
You think emergent phenomenon is easier?
It's easier to seed your own emergent phenomenon than to try and displace an entrenched cabal.
I think it's a little bit of both. There's obviously...
It's totally entrenched, though.
During Occupy Wall Street, they introduced critical race theory stuff, which shattered the anti-establishment movement, which was bipartisan. I mean, it was libertarians, conservatives, Democrats, leftists were all like, hey, it's bad what the government is doing. Then they introduced critical race theory, and all of a sudden everyone's fighting over skin color instead of,
Well, then it becomes moral, it becomes religious.
But I do think critical race theory is a phenomenon of social media platforms, because what happens is with the rise of Facebook and the algorithms which promoted content, articles that talk about injustice do well. Rage shares the most. So if you made when all these companies are experimenting with how to maximize traffic, what they ultimately discovered was police brutality makes a ton of money. People hate watch police brutality videos and then share it like crazy because of a sense of injustice. But if you add racism, sexism, homophobia, and all these things to the mix of police brutality, now you've got fruit punch. Now it's getting 10 times share. It's getting an exponential return.
That's scary.
So imagine someone born in the year 2000. They're let's say 1998. So they're 10 years old. They're starting to get on social media. Maybe they shouldn't, too young, but they are. And they see nothing but police brutality videos. It's the only thing hitting their feeds. Now it's 2012. Now they're a little bit older. The only thing they see on these platforms is constant streams of police brutality. At one point, there was a website that did nothing but police brutality videos, and it was the 400th biggest website in the world, or somewhere around there, making millions of dollars. This is what the algorithms had produced. You get a generation of people who are raised believing that this is why when you go to they have these man on the street videos. A guy went to a Venice Beach skate park. He said, how many black people, innocent black people, do you think are killed by police every year? They're like thousands, few thousand,
right? Oh,
wow. And it was like 9.
Yeah,
and it's like, and 9's bad.
It's single digit.
9's bad, but like 1,000. It's because when you grow up, imagine if when you were growing up. I mean, for those of us that are older, those of us that are younger probably already get this because they experienced in their formative years social media. I grew up with televisions and like UHF, VHF when I was a little kid. Imagine if every single channel, every single day, every news broadcaster, every nightly news report was nothing but police are murdering innocent people.
You know what it was back then?
It'd be a crisis.
It was kids getting kidnapped. Do you remember
Yep,
in
that's right.
the 80s, everybody thought they were going to get kidnapped at any moment. Yeah. Because whole comedy routines about how like, not if you're going to get kidnapped, but when you're kidnapped, what you're supposed to do. They would go out and fingerprint kids at like parks and stuff.
And stuff.
We all thought we were going to get kidnapped in the 80s growing up. It's the weirdest thing in the world.
And it was rare.
It was rage fed. It was fear.
But they knew the ratings were good because parents were scared. So then social media begins targeting a bunch of different groups in similar ways, and police brutality becomes the thing.
And there's a feedback loop of that algorithm, because if you consume it, it's going to feed you more of it.
Yep. Well, of course. And then people are going to seek out more of it. And then people are going to exaggerate. They're going to lie. Then you're going to get written articles which fabricate stories. You're going to get then you're going to end up with where we are today with stories like Ahmaud Arbery, a guy who is a felony burglary suspect who fights with some locals over their shotgun and dies in the process. Tragic event, but it turns into a lynch mob killed a man who was
went out
jogging.
hunting him down like a bunch of guys. Even the story, if people look back, there was a story in Gerald, Texas when I was a kid, early 90s. And in Gerald, Texas, there was a guy that was dragged behind a truck. I think his last name is Bird with a Y. That's my memory. If I'm riffing here, but the story is that it was racially motivated. It was this horrific hate crime of this guy that basically had gone out and dragged a dude behind his truck because he was black, which is absolutely a horrible thing to imagine. And then when you get into the nuance of it, like so many times, like there was some kind of a woman that was involved in it. They had some similar lady friends. There was some drug situation. I think both the guys had shared a prison cell at one point in time. There was all these connections between these dudes. It was an utterly personal thing. Like dragging someone behind your truck is a personal thing to way to kill somebody. It's pretty horrific. And yet it had very little to do with race. It had a lot to do with the personal animosity that this guy went out and he was like sending a message. And obviously he did. And so many people got the wrong reaction from it. And they all know things that are not true. Same thing with Matthew Shepard. People know things, they know them in their heart that are not true. They do not substantiate with the facts of the case.
Well, I think a lot of people too, they buy into the false narrative right from the start. So I was hired by my police department in May of 2014. The Ferguson unrest with the shooting of Michael Brown started in August. And I followed that pretty closely because it was directly related to my new profession, my new line of work. And at the end of the day, Eric Holder and Barack Obama's DOJ ruled that Officer Wilson shot Michael Brown in self-defense. It was a legitimate use of deadly force. How many people out there still believe the myth, hands up, don't shoot? I bet most people do.
I'd say every Democrat.
Yeah.
Every single one.
Just like they think 50% of the people who got COVID died from it.
I mean, it's
so
insane numbers.
important
I
to
think the
craft
polling
narrative.
showed that Democrats believe around 20% of people died from COVID.
Dude,
I've seen some that have been higher than that, which is amazing to me.
the tendency for people to believe what they hear the first thing they hear about something is incredibly powerful.
Trusted source.
Even think of our buddy Steve Friend, maybe even me. We've had articles later that were redacted or what's it
Retracted?
called? Retracted, or they like made an editorial change to it because they were wrong. How many people read those? It's like
My favorite is NBC News. They wrote a fake article about me, which then got picked up by a bunch of other outlets like Variety and Deadline, and then quickly removed the lies they had put in it. And so they created a feedback loop of a bunch of outlets all citing each other. NBC basically seeds the story. Deadline, Variety, etc. Insert tells the story, and then they back away from it, remove that reference, and now you've got all these articles referencing each other. Deadline reports,
That's
that
a
Variety
disinformation
reports.
campaign.
Yeah, it's yep. And then when you reach out to the journalists and say, hey, what you report is not true, they'll be like, I didn't report it, it was reported by Variety. And I'll be like, yes, but Variety is citing Deadline, and Deadline's citing you.
Right.
And they'll be like, well, we're referencing someone else.
It's the meme of Superman pointing at Superman.
Spider-Man.
Spider-Man, sorry, yeah. So Garret had one of those things that happened about Kash Patel paid them for their testimony. This was a thing that went out there. New York Times covered it, New York, or a whole bunch of lefty sources, CNN and so on. And like, you want to tell people how you left your job for like a few $1,000s?
Yeah, it's so absurd because people believe this myth. I was suspended September 26th of last year. I had never spoken to Kash Patel until November of 2022 after I'd been suspended. And so he had heard of my story. Kyle put us in touch and he's like, hey, I have this foundation. You're not, the FBI suspended you. They're stripping everything away. I told him like, yeah, we just had a baby. Like we're
couldn't even put coats on his kids.
Yeah. Because they held our belongings for 6 weeks too. And he's like, well, I think my foundation could probably help you out if that would be okay with you.
What did he ask for? What did he want?
Nothing. He didn't want to know anything about what I made protected disclosures about. He didn't want to know anything about my professional work. He just said, I heard the FBI suspended you. And
this is how the media operates. We've talked about this before. It's hilarious. They'll say something like, Jack Nicholson and Britney Spears get married. And then the average person goes, what?
Right.
She married Jack? No. Jack Nicholson got married. And also Britney Spears got married.
That's right.
To different people. But
technically accurate, visually impactful.
Was it factual but not truthful?
Yes.
That's what Michael Mel says.
Oh, that's a good one. That's very good.
Yeah, so what they'll do is they'll say something like, let's say you quit your job in 2020 and you worked for the cracker factory. And then in 2022, you get hired by a graham cracker factory and the founder pays you a huge bonus of $200,000 to start. And you're like, it's been 2 years. I had been traveling around the world, wasn't really thinking about crackers. I'm in the cracker field to get this job. The media will report CEO pays $200,000 to so-and-so who just quits their job to work for them or something like that. They can make it seem like these two things that are totally separate from each other.
It's a cut edit or a jump edit. And it's
so actually a really great example is the viral video of the guys digging the hole in the beach. And I absolutely despise how everyone falls for this. Did you see this video?
No.
It's some guys are on a beach digging a hole and it says, here's the hole we dug on Saturday. Then it jumps to a news report where they're like, a hole in the beach may have been a astrological impact. And a guy saying, look at this rock that was found. It's scorched. It was in the hole. And then everyone just shares it like, ha, 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 these guys dug a hole and the media then lied about it. No, dude, you got played. Someone saw a news report of a hole in the beach, then went and dug a hole and put their clip in front of it to trick you into thinking the media got it wrong. It's all the manipulation game. Everyone just bought it. And I'm just like, people want to believe what they want to believe, man. It's that simple.
Mike Rowe was so eloquent about talking about what the Let's Go Brandon phenomenon was. And people were always like, oh, it's just being mean to Joe Biden. It's a way to hide profanity. And what it really was something where people recognized that they were being played.
Yeah.
Something was happening on live TV. Some woman said something that was absurdly different. It had nothing to do with what was happening around them. Listen to them. They're all chanting, let's go, Brandon. When they were chanting something that was not that. They were not saying.
It was F Joe Biden.
Correct.
Yes.
That's where the crowd is yelling, F Joe Biden. And she's like, they're saying, let's go, Brandon. And so she says that. And everybody puts that on the shirt, not because they're saying F Joe Biden, although some people obviously did. What they did say was, the media is lying to us. They actually lie to our faces when the proof is in front of us.
Yep.
And so that was why it was so important. And then, of course, it was more important because Joe Biden agreed with it. So whenever I wrote that on my whiteboard at work, I just quoted the president on December 24th of 2021. He said, I agree, let's go Brandon. So I also agree, let's go Brandon. But there's something sad about when it happens in real time and people eyeball it, and then the media, then they play it again. Everyone's being mean to Joe Biden. It's like, no, you clowns came out and outed yourself, and everybody saw it on national live TV. And why did she feel like she had to lie about it? It's so bizarre, but they're compelled to.
It's what they do all the time.
It's what they do.
I mean, it really does make you wonder when they seemingly lie for just absolute BS reasons, but they do. I'm telling you, man, people need to understand that, so we got a request recently for me. It happens periodically. Like the New York Times wanted to talk to me about something, and I'm like, yeah, good. Yeah, right.
Hard pass.
Not going to happen. There, some things I have no problem if I get. So I got directly contacted by someone at Washington Post about something, and I gave them a quote. I'm like, whatever, I don't care. But on some issues, on most issues, I won't engage with these people because they will lie 100% of the time.
They will say
100%.
They'll be like, this thing, ... ellipses, leaving out all the context, and then they'll just say something
better than
totally
that.
opposite.
They use their opinions to formulate what you really said. So they'll ask you something like, Kyle, what are your thoughts on January 6th? And you'll say something like, what an awful day. An awful day. I mean, none of that should have happened. I'm shocked.
Ryan Riley did this to me.
Yeah.
And
then what they'll do is they won't quote you. They'll say, when asked for a comment, they began to lament that Donald Trump lost the election and said that what had happened to Trump was awful, seemingly in support of the rioters. And you're like, what?
Yeah.
I was criticizing the riot.
Right.
No,
Right.
they can
Yeah.
just interpret it how they see fit.
Yeah.
And then you can't sue them because they'll be like, well, that's how I understood it.
Yeah. Yeah. This has happened to me, Kyle, and Steve. I was deposed in February by Republican and Democrat attorneys, and then I testified publicly in May. In the interim, the Democrat side leaked little pieces of my testimony and editorialized themselves to the New York Times and some other places, and they love to say, oh, they just believe conspiracy theories about January 6th.
Yep.
When I talked about January 6th, I talked about a lead that I received where then the FBI told me that they had facial recognition match for the guy they wanted me to investigate. They used a driver's license photo that was 25 years old to get the facial recognition match. So I don't care the type of case. If it's an Antifa case, a January 6th case, a bank robbery, I don't care. If you send me a photo from 25 years ago and say you got a facial recognition match, that's a problem, a really big problem. It forbids due process. And so, I mean, I worked that case or that lead like harder than I've worked many other leads because I was like, I could smell the roses. I'm like, something's not right about this. And this was early. This was, January 15th or something, January 20th of 2021. And and then they say, oh, he just has conspiracy theories.
They do the thing where they're like, Kevin McCarthy opens impeachment inquiry despite no evidence of Joe Biden committing a crime.
There's no evidence, yeah.
But here's the issue. Aside from the fact that there is evidence of a crime, an inquiry is the seeking of the evidence.
Right.
An inquiry is, hey, we've got probable cause.
Yeah.
Let's investigate to see if there's evidence
You don't
of a
need
crime.
probable cause actually to open investigations. That's not the FBI standard for sure. We don't need probable cause means we're serving a search warrant. We're going to go get it. What the requirement is a credible allegation or information that a crime has been committed. So is there an allegation or information that crime may have been going on underneath Biden's political influence? The obvious answer is yes. There are allegations and there's some information. Then you go find it.
The purpose is to taint, to poison the well.
Right.
So that someone, what you'll get is the average person saying, they're trying to impeach Joe Biden with no evidence of a crime. The appropriate response is, they're investigating to see if there was a crime. What do you mean? Like, they're not impeaching him right now. They're saying
it's a probe.
It's a probe. There's been a bunch of accusations of criminal activity.
Ian knows what I was called.
Do you think that if, and this is a good way to put it for everybody, if one of your family members or friends is like, why are they doing this? Say, I mean, if someone's accused of a crime, should the law enforcement do some kind of investigation into that crime? So let's say like a woman gets raped and then she goes to the police and says, I was raped. They say, do you have evidence? She goes, no. Well, then they should say, okay, well, we're going to try and see if there's evidence to support this claim this woman's made.
Or you
don't
could do what they did
her.
to Donald Trump. There was an allegation and then they impeached him.
Right.
You could do that. And I'm not the biggest Trump fan in the world. He's not like a role model to my children. I think he makes some bad decisions. I think he's his own worst enemy in many ways. But looking at what happened to him, just objectively, you can look and say, is this being treated in the same way? And the answer is, of course, no. One of the proudest moments for me is the fact that I got suspended from the FBI before they went into Mar-a-Lago. I know people that were at Mar-a-Lago. My old office was in Washington, D.C. in Judicial Square. And
were you friends with these people?
Yeah. I mean, we had lunch occasionally. Like they're people that were on my academy class roster that I would sit and, I know pretty well that were there.
They're
that were
evil.
involved in it. You want to know something? Not to get conspiratorial, but the group that went in and engaged in the process there that went down to Mar-a-Lago to do it was a group called CI-14. That's Counterintelligence 14. They're the Russian espionage squad. That's what they did.
Wow. That's right. Yeah, I think we were reading about that.
So they went there and did that. I know guys on the squad. I'm not going to say anybody's names because they're decent human beings. But they did things that I think are ordinary men like. I think that's a problem.
I think they're evil.
But here's the other
That's the
funny
banality
thing.
of evil.
Does anyone know? Did you guys see? I congratulated the other day for how FBI they caught the pipe bomber from January 6th.
They did.
Oh, tell me about it.
Yeah, no, they didn't. They have it
course.
still. Right. So, and guess who got the pipe bomber case right off the bat?
Same group.
CI-14.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, if they
It might just be coincidence because they didn't have the bandwidth because they were so overwhelmed. How weird is that though? It's so weird. And so you can have your people that are in the audience are going to go like, oh my God, that is true.
Why would a CI squad get a bombing?
Same question I had when we got put on the surveillance for it. It's like, why is CI-14 running this?
That's weird.
Why
That's because it's their inside unit that
Or which is possible, this is that they were so overwhelmed by January 6th stuff. And they were. Anybody who thinks the FBI, quote unquote, planned January 6th, I'm not saying that there wasn't a plan for people in places, but the FBI certainly didn't quarterback it out of Washington Field. If it was done, it had to have been out of headquarters. It's more likely that there were a lot of co-aligned interests from different, federal agencies that are all trying to drum up, terrorism cases.
I think,
and more likely it came out of a DHS who has a very different, they don't have the rules. That we do.
I would assume
Just for
that
what it's worth.
the most likely scenario is more so just if it happens and let it happen because we can use it.
Well, here's how we know that was a really scary thing. In Washington, D.C., anybody who's ever worked in D.C. in law enforcement knows there's a thing called an NSSE, the National Special Security Events. Those are run by DHS by statute and by policy, and the Secret Service runs it. So they set up a command post. It looks like this. There's a bunch of different screens. There's a bunch of people from every different agency. DC Metro PD is there, ATF, FBI, DEA, Department of Energy has people that goes around and looks for nuclear bombs and stuff like that. And they do this all the time. They do it for July 4th celebrations, for big parades, for major events. They will declare an NSSC. It happens every year for the State of the Union when the president does a big motorcade over to Congress. So these are known protest, known public events where they set up a security perimeter and everybody gets involved. And the locals love it because the Fed will pay their overtime. So it's actually a good deal for them. They love that. And the Fed doesn't care because they just print more money and do whatever they want, right? So that's NSSEs. They happen regularly. They happen for every presidential inauguration. And when you were there on January 20th, that was an NSSE.
Right.
And everybody's involved. There's undercovers in the crowd like I was. And all they're trying to do is make sure that First Amendment protections are allowed and that people that try to disrupt it get stopped and that Park Police is flying the helicopter. Everyone's doing their thing. That didn't get declared for January 6th. Why? They had a minimal presence. They didn't have DC Metro riot police on standby. Think about how many protests happen in DC on an annual basis. You have a better idea than
Every
most.
day, probably.
Almost definitely
It's DC,
every week.
come on.
Every single week, there's either a scheduled or unscheduled protest that gets big. And they couldn't handle this one event. That's highly suspicious. I agree with you. If it happens, it happens. Pull back the curtain. Let's see what happens. If
That's why the cops were. There's videos of them standing by.
I just kicked over the trash can. It's kick the ant mound and see what happens, and don't come in and try to cover it up. Don't contain them.
Gentlemen, this has been absolute blast to have you and to talk about all this stuff. Really do appreciate it. It's about that time we're going to start wrapping up. Do you guys want to shout anything out so people can find you somewhere?
Yep, you guys can find me, and you can sometimes find Garrett on my podcast. We do a morning stream at 9:30 Eastern time on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. It's just my name. I'm usually a little bit less amped up than this, but I've been drinking some of your Cast Brew coffee, so I'm
a lot too.
I'm running through this like 32-ounce tumbler. I'm rocking into that. But they can find me there, and they can find me on all the social medias at Kyle Seraphin, Twitter and Truth and so on.
Right on.
For me on socials, I'm at GOB Actual. I have a Substack. It's lastline.substack.com. All of that stuff is under lock and key right now per my attorneys. So hopefully someday soon I'll be able to open that up and
release the Garrett.
Yeah, because I put some effort, especially into the Substack. That and that's probably about it.
Right on.
Yeah.
It was great talking to you guys. Really fascinating stuff. Ian Crossland, you know where to find me. At Ian Crossland on the internet. I'll see you guys later. Do this again. Let's do this again. That was really interesting.
Right on. And become a member at timcast.com to support our work directly. We've got a bunch of really great Culture War episodes coming up every Friday morning. Glad to have you guys. Next show will be tonight at 8 p.m. youtube.com/timcastirl as per usual. And we'll see you all then.